Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 222, A Canopy of Darkness. Advent of the Tree World. The battle raged on. In the face of berserk mutant beasts charging toward misty mountains with bloodshot eyes, Wuxia showed no mercy. After all, opportunities for plundering evolution points on such a large scale were very few and far between. As for the intervention of 3 generals and Ling Er, while they were by no means weak, they were like a drop in the ocean in the face of endless beast tide. Their intervention at most be considered as filling in the gaps left by Wuxia. "It's almost time," murmured Wuxia, looking at the color of the sky. He had his own plan. Dawn would break in 3 hours at most. And with the break of dawn, the second round of spiritual energy tide would truly rise. By then, the beast tide triggered colorful spiritual energy would gradually disperse. In other words, Wuxia did not have much time left to harvest. With this in mind, Wuxia, taking a deep breath, cast a glance at the endless waves of beasts continuously surging like the sea. After a moment, his pupils contracted as he muttered softly, "Advent of the Tree World." While Wuxia's voice was very low, it shook the sky and even the earth like a peal of thunder. Immediately after, along Wuxia's body, innumerable streams of verdant spiritual energy started spreading out in all directions, momentarily causing the entire land to shimmer. And mere moments later, boom, 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 the earth and the mountains started quaking wildly. Immediately afterward, one sapling after another broke through the soil and started growing at a breakneck speed. In the blink of an eye, they had reached dozens of meters in height. Their roots spread deeper into the earth, and their branches coiled like giant pythons. What was truly astonishing was that these branches started charging toward the mutant beasts as if they were endowed with life, binding and strangling them. However, this was not the most terrifying part. The truly horrifying fact was that the countless trees rose right amidst the beast tide. And what did it mean? Roar, roar, roar. Screech, screech, screech. From then on, desperate cries and piercing wails of the birds and beasts drowned the forest, echoing through the sky. A scene which the mutant beasts and even humans would never forget in their lifetime was completely unfolding. A forest, no, an endless primeval forest rose from the ground. While it painted the picture of a lush and beautiful forest, it was eerie and horrifying. Amidst its grandeur and vastness, there was a majestic canopy of darkness that blotted the sun and the sky. And it happened to be accompanied by a rich shade of red, and a persistent nauseating scent of blood. What is this? Not far from misty mountains, several human squads happened to be hiding. However, now, at this moment, when they gazed at the rising primeval forest in the distance, their pupils contracted to the size of needle points, and their faces went as pale as snow. A miracle had occurred before their eyes. In a flash, a vast ancient forest had grown out of nowhere. Misty mountains that were supposed to have been trampled flat by the beast tide had once again come to life because of this sudden rise of the primeval forest. Furthermore, this primeval forest was extremely terrifying. Really terrifying. The ancient forest seemed to be imbued with life. The branches were easily winding up the mutant beasts. One after another, roots rose from the ground, silently spreading toward the tide of beasts. If the terror of the beast tide was due to its vast numbers, then at this moment, this primeval forest, which was no less in scale than the beast tide, revealed a different kind of horror. "What should we do?" a military officer murmured as his face turned pale. He had come here from a nearby city to gather information. Never in his dreams he had ever expected to witness such a terrifying sight. This is definitely not the work of some ordinary mutant beast. No, this should be called a miracle, a true miracle. But if the unknown is added to this miracle, it would become terror in the truest sense. "Ha!" Exhaling a long, deep breath, another human asked, "Did you record it?" "Yes, we did." Nodding frantically, a human pulled out a video camera. "All right, let's retreat quickly. This is something we can't provoke." Once this was suggested, this human squad was the first to leave. It was worth mentioning that they were pretty far from Misty Mountains, far enough to not be swept up in the beast tide. Otherwise, with their strength, surviving even for a moment in the midst of the beast tide would have been a tall order. On the other side, on a hill, 2 figures appeared quietly. One was a black bull with crescent-shaped black horns, and the other was a red fox with beautiful red fur fluttering like flames. "I can't believe this is what our master is capable of," Ninetails murmured to herself, her face lighting up with astonishment at the sight of primeval forest rising from the ground in a flash in the distance. If one looked closer, they would even notice a touch of indescribable horror in her expression. Master's divine abilities are beyond our imagination. Bull Demon, on the other hand, was grinning happily. Actually, their worries were unnecessary. With Yu Ziyu's divine ability, he alone was enough to deal with this vast sea-like beast tide. Indeed, it's beyond our imagination. After a moment of silence, Nine-Tails also nodded her agreement. However, compared to Bull Demon, she had not seen Yu Ziyu for too long. She really had no idea what Yu Ziyu was capable of. Right now, sensing the familiar aura and witnessing the terrifying sight, a strange look could not help but appear on her face. Instead of helping Yu Ziyu, it might be better to help the tide of beasts escape. After all, right now, if one looked at the beast tide, they would certainly notice that the innumerable beasts that had been charging toward Misty Mountains moments ago were now dispersed and happened to be fleeing in all directions. Their escape was so quick that it was astonishing. Clearly, the horrifying spiritual energy fluctuations produced by the advent of the tree world had completely shattered the spirits of these mutant beasts. Now, they were not only charging toward Misty Mountains, but each one of them wished they had grown 2 more legs to escape this devilish place as quickly as possible. "Let's go," suggesting in a soft and gentle voice, Nine-Tails suddenly rushed toward the fleeing mutant beasts in the distance. Elder sister, what are we doing?" Bull Demon was puzzled by Nine-Tails' actions. "We returned in such haste that we forgot to even prepare a gift for Master." As she spoke, a human girl-like coquettish smile appeared on Nine-Tails' face. "Why aren't you moving? Are you planning to return empty-handed?" How could that be?" With a laugh, Bull Demon also accelerated and decisively rushed toward some of the more powerful or mysterious mutant beasts within the beast tide. It would be unacceptable not to bring some gifts for Lord Divine Tree. Meanwhile, Yu Ziyu was completely oblivious to the return of Nine-Tails and Bull Demon. Compared to observing the surroundings, his consciousness was completely immersed in the primeval forest that had risen from the ground, capturing or strangling the mutant beasts. Every single one of his thoughts was related to the actions of giant trees in the primeval forest. He was manipulating the entire forest to launch an attack on the scathing beast tide. As for why Yu Ziyu did not activate the advent of the tree world from the very beginning, it was obvious. He wanted to get maximum benefit in one fell swoop. If he had activated it from the beginning, how could so much of the beast tide have eagerly penetrated Misty Mountains? The range of the advent of the tree world was limited. Naturally, Yu Ziyu wanted to drag as many mutant beasts as possible within the limited range of the advent of the tree world. Only in this way could he either capture them for taming them later or slaughter them for evolution points. As for whether to capture them for future subjugation or to kill them for harvesting evolution points, it was a decision that Yu Ziyu would make on the spot. It all depended on whether these mutant beasts could escape or not. If their speed was too fast and the roots and branches controlled by Yu Ziyu failed to catch them, then Yu Ziyu was left with no choice but to kill them. After all, compared to capturing, killing was the simplest and most straightforward approach. Evolution begins with a big tree. Chapter 223, The Former Overlord Dinosaur. Time gradually passed by. In just a short half-hour, the entire beast tide in Misty Mountains had dispersed. However, if one were to look at the part of Misty Mountains where the primeval forest had risen, they would certainly witness a shocking sight. Countless carcasses happened to be hanging by the branches. And far more mutant beasts lay motionless on the ground as if they were dead. The terrifying ability, Paralysis, granted Yu Ziyu the ability to secrete poison through his branches. And now, under Yu Ziyu's control, the trees produced using the seeds of life also partially carried the poison. If used effectively, it could also help maximize the number of prey captured. At this moment, with a thought, Yu Ziyu roughly knew the number of prey captured. Over 17,000. A faint smile spread on Yu Ziyu's lips, feeling satisfied. While there were all kinds of mutant beasts, it was better to have them than not. Furthermore, if these mutant beasts turned out to be useless, they could still be killed for evolution points, which was not a loss either. However, when he thought about evolution points, the smile on Yu Ziyu's lips grew even bigger. Raising his gaze, when he looked at the status screen, a long row of numbers captured all of Yu Ziyu's attention. 720,000 evolution points? Yu Ziyu murmured softly, unable to contain his excitement. 720,000 was not a small number. With so many evolution points, he could build a solid foundation in Tier 3. It also meant he could experience a rapid surge in strength in a short amount of time. Of course, that was not the most important thing. The most important thing could be found within the primeval forest that rose from the ground. If one could look clearly, they would see over 10 tightly wrapped mutant beasts hanging at the highest point like dumplings. These mutant beasts were all in Tier 1. They were true transcendent creatures. At the end of the day, transcendent creature had a certain level of strength. They were not that easy to kill. Unless you paid special attention, the advent of the tree world alone was not enough to suppress them. Furthermore, most transcendent creatures were too agile. It was only after Yu had set his sights on them that they became prey. Two among them were most noteworthy. One was a mammoth that seemed to have stepped out straight from the prehistoric era. It was so strong that even Yu had to take notice of it, especially its white as jade ivory tusk. They seemed as if they could tear even the sky apart, causing Yu's pupils to shrink. It was this ivory tusk that tore apart a tenth of the tree world. If it were not for Yu mobilizing his spiritual energy, forcibly suppressing it with the roots risen from the ground, this guy might have escaped. Besides this massive creature resembling a mammoth, there was another creature that made Yu's pupils contract. This was a creature that Yu found quite unfamiliar. But judging by its appearance, Yu could not help but suspect that the apex predator that had ruled Earth for more than 160 million years had returned. No, not returned. It was an atavistic evolution of a present-day organism that had brought it back. Its entire body was supported by a pair of short and stubby hind limbs, while its front limbs were extremely sharp and ferocious. Behind it, a tail resembling a steel whip swayed from time to time. However, what was most terrifying was its pair of eyes. It was exuding the cruelty and ferocity that only top predators possessed. And this was the mysterious creature that Yu was most concerned about. It was a strange creature that resembled a dinosaur. The very creatures that once dominated this planet but had mysteriously disappeared. Some say, dinosaurs were the rulers of this world. If not for the sudden disappearance of dinosaurs, humans would have never been able to rise. Some also say, if dinosaurs were to return, even the top predators on the food chain pyramid would have to step aside. From these evaluations of this species, one could also tell how terrifying this species was. And now, right in front of Yu was a dinosaur that was 4 to 5 meters tall. However, compared to the transcendent creatures, its current spiritual energy was only 8,000 to 9,000, far inferior to the transcendence valued by Yu. But it was precisely this guy, who appeared to be quite weak in terms of strength, that erupted with power not inferior to a transcendent. As such, Yu took notice of it and even hung it in the sky of the tree world to show his importance. If it really is a dinosaur, I estimate it's another atavistic mutant beast, Yu murmured, a little intrigued. After all, a dinosaur, whether in terms of its inherent strength or its almost mythical legend, was worth anticipation. He even had a feeling that it would give him a pleasant surprise. It was worth mentioning that if Yu decided to kill all these captured mutant beasts, including over a dozen transcendent creatures, his evolution points should be able to break through 1,000,000. However, after some thought, Yu discarded this notion. It was not a good idea to fish all the fish in the pond. Besides, he wanted to establish a monster kingdom for which he would have to kill a lot. So, why give up the future for the sake of immediate benefits? And compared to exterminating all these prey, Yu hoped to be able to use them for himself, preparing for the great era that was coming. Furthermore, a monster kingdom could not be established with a few trees and beasts. Even though North Canyon had a tree and 1,000 beasts, it was not enough. After all, any random human country had a population of over 100 million. Compared to such numbers, Yu's North Canyon could not even be considered a village right now. Yu heaved a sigh, feeling a bit helpless. Even if they were elite, a monster kingdom would have at least several 100,000 citizens, or else they could not call themselves a monster kingdom. And this also meant that Yu's path was still quite long. Just at this moment, as if sensing something, Yu suddenly raised his head. In the distance, at the horizon, two familiar figures were slowly approaching. One was a black bull with crescent-shaped horns. The other was a red fox with flames like fur, strolling gracefully. Bull demon 9 tails. At the sight of these two mutant beasts, Yu was overjoyed and as well as relieved. These two are finally back. Lord Divine Tree, crying in an excited voice, Bull Demon started rushing over. However, even faster than him was a glaring red streak of light. Master, long time no see, a soft and gentle voice suddenly rang in Yu's ears. The voice carried a hint of longing and an indescribable charm. It immediately shocked Yuziyu. Oh? Staring dumbfounded at Nine Tails, who spoke from a distance, Yuziyu was a bit perplexed. Speaking using vocal cords? Are you kidding me? And what's with those two fiery red tails swaying left and right behind her? Could it be? She is evolving toward becoming a nine-tailed fox? Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 224, the inheritance from a previous era. Shaking his head and dispelling his doubts, Yuziyu took a good look at Nine Tails as she approached from a distance. In moments, a series of information flashed in his mind. Race, Celestial Fox. Rank, Tier 1 Transcendent. Bloodline talent. It can grow an additional tail with each advancement, each tail carrying a formidable talent. Unique abilities, enchanting eyes. Its gorgeous eyes are the treasures of the world with the mystical power of bewitching. Flame mastery. It can control flames to a certain extent. Flaming claws. Its claws entwined in flames are so hot that they can easily tear through metals. Flame cloak. Its fiery red fur is ablaze with wisps of flames. Anyone who touches it will be burned. Speech. It has developed a strange bone which allows it to speak all kinds of languages, even human languages. Flame rush. Using flames as footholds, it can significantly increase its speed, even achieving explosive acceleration. Yuziyu's pupils slightly contracted as he looked at Nine Tails, who was rushing from the distance, immersed in thought. Bloodline talent? Yuziyu muttered, a bit confused. It was the first time he had encountered such terminology. Furthermore, he had a feeling that this bloodline talent was even more mysterious and more terrifying than innate talent. At least he could easily see through innate talent, but now, looking at Nine Tails' bloodline talent, he knew almost nothing apart from the fact that it was associated with her tails. Yuziyu smacked his lips but did not mind it much. However, if such a thing had appeared on some unfamiliar mutant beast, he would definitely have dealt with it. As for Nine Tails, she was part of his circle. The stronger his allies were, the better. Just then. Boom. With a terrifying howl, a figure bathing in flames arrived at North Canyon. Master. As another greeting rang in his ears, Yuziyu reached out to support Nine Tails with one of his branches. How was the Great Desert? Not bad, I guess. Nodding slightly, Nine Tails climbed up Yuziyu's branches as usual. In moments, after a few leaps, Nine Tails had arrived at the canopy. She picked a nice position and laid down. Clearly she was tired. Yuziyu smiled and gently stroked Nine Tails' silky fur. She always enjoyed it when he groomed her fur. At this moment, a tremor coming from the distance shook the ground. Looking toward the source, he saw a black streak shooting toward North Canyon. What caught his attention, however, were the two mutant beasts on Bull Demon's back. Seemingly aware of Yuziyu's curiosity, a voice suddenly appeared in his ear, explaining, "Master, these are the gifts that Bull Demon and I brought for you. We hope you like them." Gifts? Yuziyu chuckled as he looked at the two critically injured transcendent creatures on Bull Demon's back, his eyes narrowing slightly. A black panther and a grimacing yet weak blood-red wolf. While they were small in size, their auras were far from weak. However, when Yuziyu noticed the gaping wounds on their bellies that seemed to have been pierced through, his corners of mouth could not help but twitch. Compared to Bull Demon and Nine Tails, I've been very gentle. With these thoughts, Yuziyu's branches curled around the two transcendent creatures, who had narrowly escaped the advent of the tree world, and threw them into the spirit pond. Thanks to the nourishment of the spirit pond, they would not die from their severe injuries. Moreover, White Tiger, Golden Ant, and other mutant beasts had also stood up one after another. With them guarding North Canyon, these two transcendent creatures would not be able to escape even if they had wings. At this moment, as if remembering something, Yuziyu looked at Nine Tails, who was lying down on him, and curiously asked, "Nine Tails, what is your bloodline talent?" Hearing this, Nine Tails, who had pretended to be asleep, raised her eyelids slightly, looking somewhat surprised. "Master, can't you tell?" Saying so, she asked with a hint of suspicion, "Aren't you able to discern our talents?" "Well," after a moment of silence, Yuziyu replied, feeling a bit embarrassed, "I actually couldn't see your bloodline talent." "Okay." Nodding slightly, the corner of Nine Tails' lips curled up into a faint, almost smug smile, as if she was quite pleased with herself. After a while, Nine Tails slowly propped herself up as her fiery red fur billowed. "The innate talent seems to have developed from my bloodline, or rather, they are certain abilities that I would awaken, only each ability is carried by one of my tails." Saying so, she contemplated for a moment before adding, "Until now, my tails carry two kinds of abilities, and I only have a vague understanding of them. I only know that one is called charm, which seems to grant me the ability to bewitch mutant beasts with weaker spiritual energy than me. The second ability is called spiritual power accumulation, which allows me to store a large amount of spiritual energy, and even convert the spiritual energy of the surroundings for my use." Listening to Ninetail's explanation, Yuziu's eyes flickered slightly. "Is that so?" Muttering, Yuziu slowly raised his gaze. After a moment, two innate talents appeared in his sight. One was named Charm, and the other was Spiritual Power Accumulation. Compared to Ninetail's description, Yuziu saw a more detailed description. For instance, if Ninetails could cultivate the charm ability to the highest level, it could even allow her to shapeshift, thus allowing her to enchant others more effectively. Whereas mastering the spiritual power accumulation to the highest level would allow her a reserve of limitless energy. How formidable and mysterious! Yuziu murmured softly. Now, when he looked at Ninetails, his gaze carried a hint of admiration. Her bloodline talent was no different than a ladder straight to the top. After all, it was extremely difficult to tell in which direction the innate talents would evolve into after reaching the peak. However, Ninetail's bloodline talents already had detailed descriptions of their ultimate versions. In light of this, Yuziu managed to deduce the difference between innate talents and bloodline talents. Innate talent relied entirely on oneself, while bloodline talent was an innate talent buried deep within one's bloodline, developed and perfected by previous generations. All Ninetails needed to do was follow in the footsteps of her predecessors, step by step, to reach the peak. This would explain why they were called bloodline talents. Because it is indeed a form of hereditary innate talent. In other words, Ninetails might have opened the inheritance of a great fox lineage from the previous era. Reaching this conclusion made Yuziu's gaze flickered with complex emotions. Sure enough, just as the theory of spiritual energy tide speculated, the previous era had a terrifying transcendent civilization. Thousands of races used to coexist with each other, with 100 clans standing at the apex. Only this could explain the silver-haired middle-aged man's ancient wisdom and Ninetail's current bloodline talent. Of course, as if realizing something, Yuziu's gaze shifted to the nearby golden monkey, who had returned with Ling Air, Honey Badger, and the others. Could he have awakened abilities from the previous era as well? Otherwise, his mastery of staff techniques would be very difficult to explain. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 225, The Advent of the Divine Tree. It's not the time to dwell on all of this now, muttering to himself, Yuziu slowly started extending his body. Moments later, much to the mutant beast's perplexion, Yuziu's tree body began to rise from the ground. 100 meters. 200 meters. 300 meters. Yuziu's height continued to increase at a pace visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, it broke through the mist's blockade and disappeared into the depths of the night sky. Subtly, his countless branches shimmered under the starlight. At a glance, it looked both divine and terrifying. What's that? Far away, in a city, someone stared in the direction of misty mountains, seemingly noticing something. What? With a hint of suspicion, a woman followed the man's gaze. Moments later, as if she had seen something unbelievable, a sharp scream pierced through the night sky. Oh my God! Tightly covering her mouth, the woman stared in astonishment at the colossal tree that had covered the sky in the distance. However, compared to ordinary trees, this particular tree appeared to be draped in starlight. Its branches that resembled willow tendrils were emitting a green glow, filling the night sky with a radiant aura. At this moment, this sight was not just witnessed by this couple. One after another, other humans on the street also noticed the towering tree rising in the north. Oh my God! Is this a joke? It must be fake, right? I must be still asleep. Has a tree monster born, or has a tree god descended on this world? Cries of surprise rang one after another. The entire city broke into an uproar. However, it was not just the nearby city. Thanks to the satellite network established by China, this daunting and dumbfounding scene had spread across the internet. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau. What's going on? Accompanied by hurrying footsteps, the deputy director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau rushed over. Deputy Director, gritting his teeth tightly, A young man pointed to the holographic display not far away. After a moment, a horrifying sight entered the deputy director's sight. In the pitch-black night, a towering tree tore through the clouds and filled the night sky. It was shining brightly as if adorned with stars. It had an arrogant yet dominating presence like none was above it. This, the deputy director stuttered as her face turned as pale as snow, even beads of sweat could be seen appearing on her forehead. The terrifying existence hiding in misty mountains has finally appeared in the world, but I never expected it to be a spirit tree. A sigh escaped an old man's lips, feeling helpless. A spirit tree? Deeply staring at the enormous tree that covered the sky on the screen, the deputy director bitterly smiled before asking doubtfully, "Are you absolutely certain it's a spirit tree and not a tree monster?" Saying this, the deputy director's expression suddenly turned grave as she immediately ordered, "Quickly check the peak spiritual energy of this tree monster. I need to report to the higher-ups immediately." However, after a moment looking at the motionless crowd, the deputy director's face suddenly changed and angrily shouted, "Are you all deaf? I told you to check the peak spiritual energy of this tree monster." Deputy Director, the spiritual energy monitoring satellites of Sichuan Belt have been destroyed. Forcing a bitter smile, the elderly man continued explaining, "If I'm not mistaken, those satellites should have been attacked by this spirit, no tree monster. After all, according to the last images received from the spiritual energy monitoring satellites, the thing that hit them was leaf-shaped." The deputy director's face gradually stiffened as she fell into silence. Clearly, this series of information had left her bewildered. Not long after. Exhaling a long, deep breath, the deputy director suppressed her shock and ordered in a deep voice, "Then do a rough spiritual energy assessment. I need to know what tier of transcendent this tree is. Next, notify the military immediately and prepare for defensive measures. If necessary, consider a nuclear strike. Lastly, convene the senior staff of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau for a meeting." After a series of consecutive orders, the deputy director hastily left the monitoring room and headed to her office. The trouble is really big this time. The deputy director let out a resigned sigh. She knew that an event significant enough to shake the entirety of China and even the entire human race had occurred. However, at this moment, Yu Ziyu had no knowledge of the turmoil he had caused. Or perhaps he knew but simply did not care. For a very long time, an incredibly long time, he had been cautiously hiding within misty mountains. But now, he was a Tier 3 transcendent with a peak spiritual energy of 1,800,000. Furthermore, he had harvested nearly 1,000,000 evolution points during this recent beast tide. Whether it was his strength or foundation, it was ample. However, that was not the most important thing. What was most crucial was that the second round of the spiritual energy tide had arrived. He could already feel the earth trembling as if it were craving something. Powerful and majestic fluctuations were spreading upward from deep beneath the earth's surface. Compared to ordinary people and even mutant beasts, as a tree with roots extending thousands of meters deep, he had the clearest perception of the earth. In other words, if nothing unexpected happened, a true cataclysm was about to occur. Not just a city nor a province. Not even a country nor a continent. It was a cataclysm that would affect the entire planet. And in the face of such a cataclysm, how could humans have the time to pay attention to him, when they would have trouble safeguarding themselves? In other words, at this moment he could finally fully extend his body. His towering, majestic body that he had concealed from human sight, to shield it from the prying eyes, could finally reveal itself to the world tonight. At this moment, feeling that his growth had reached its limit, Yu Ziyu slowly opened the perspective from the treetop. After a moment, what entered his field of vision was the land and mountains shrouded in mist. Misty Mountains, Raya Mountains, and even human cities fell into Yu Ziyu's sight. Viewed from high above, everything appeared tiny. Taking a deep breath, he savored the beauty of looking down from up top. Yu Ziyu focused his gaze, and with a surge of spiritual energy, the scene in his perspective continued to zoom in. After a moment, Yu Ziyu could clearly see a valley, where a stream was flowing and swirling, splashing shiny and silvery mist. This was a utilization of spiritual energy that allowed him to have a clearer view of the distance. It was similar in principle to a human telescope. The difference was that a telescope relied on external tools, while Yu Ziyu depended on his own abilities. Shifting his gaze, Yu Ziyu turned it toward a human city located about 20 kilometers from Misty Mountains. This was the most isolated city closest to Misty Mountains. With his elevated perspective, Yu Ziyu could clearly see that the city was surrounded by walls that were several tens of meters high. So, this is what Qing Er referred to as the defensive walls guarding the city? He could not help but smile, finding it quite amusing. He had no idea about the conditions of other nations, but China seemed to have made good preparations before the impending cataclysm. But can they really weather it? With a playful expression, Yu Ziyu stopped pondering this question. It was because, at this very moment, the real cataclysm had arrived. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 226, Apocalypse and Beast Tide. A deafening roar reverberated through the entire world, shaking it. The thunderous sound seemed to have originated from the depths of the earth. Humans, animals, plants, marine life, each and every one had come to a standstill. However, after a moment, boom boom boom. Terrifying rumbles resonated as the ground slowly started quaking. Then, much to the astonishment and horror of countless onlookers, a faint multicolored radiance began seeping out from the ground. "What's this?" Exclaiming with incredulity, a man felt an inexplicable desire welling up deep within his heart. Before he could react, a strand of colorful energy gently touched his body. The next moment, a thunderous sound echoed in his mind, fiercely shaking the man. Then, as if sensing something, an ecstatic look appeared on his face. I've leveled up, the man started shouting in excitement, unable to contain his joy. However, in moments he suddenly froze. The reason was that the energy continuously rising from the ground was being absorbed by his body like a sponge. It kept absorbing and absorbing until it reached a point, after which, much to the man's horror, his body began to disintegrate. Yes, disintegrate. There was no pain, no cries, just a deathly silence and the man's look of unbelievable despair. In no time at all, this once vibrant life quietly dissipated into the air. At this moment, if one were to look at the streets of the city, they would undoubtedly see many humans slowly disappearing. Of course, compared to the disappearing people, many more were wearing ecstatic looks on their faces. The joy of their strength continuously growing, and their spiritual energy steadily rising had replaced all the fear and unease. Compared to the humans in the city, the colorful spiritual energy rising from the ground was even more concentrated in the heart of forests and mountains. In the blink of an eye, it tainted the sky and the ground with colorful vibrant hues of different colors. However, these colorful hues disappeared just as quickly as they appeared, disappearing into the bodies of mutant beasts. Roar, roar, roar. Amidst the roars and howls, the auras of mutant beasts started to grow crazily. They disappeared into the rocks and stones, whereupon the rocks started to gain a metallic sheen at a speed visible to the naked eyes. Meanwhile in North Canyon, slowly expanding his pores, Yu Ziyu's tree body erupted with a terrifying suction. Howls of winds resounded in the canyon as a whirlpool started to take shape. Slowly, a vortex of colorful spiritual energy formed around Yu Ziyu, enveloping him. Immediately, the mutant beasts in North Canyon became excited, greedily absorbing this dense and majestic colorful spiritual energy. Thanks to Yu Ziyu, the colorful spiritual energy around them was noticeably denser than outside. Of course, not just at Yu Ziyu's location, but multicolored vortexes emerged one after another at various places throughout the entire China. However, compared to the enormous vortex around Yu Ziyu, most of the other multicolored vortices were half or quarter of its size. Furthermore, among them, one vortex happened to be around Yu Ziyu's 9 great beasts, the panda, Brewmaster. Brewmaster found a secluded corner for himself and opened his mouth wide. After a moment, a small multicolored vortex, smaller than Yu Ziyu's, appeared around him. A colorful vortex was a sign of absorbing spiritual energy. Though the size of the vortex did not necessarily represent one's fearsome strength, it did indicate a certain level of power. At the very least, creatures with powerful spiritual energy absorption capabilities would not be lacking in strength. At this moment, it seemed as though all the beings had entered a state of meditation. Of course, those who were unable to withstand the colorful spiritual energy were desperately fleeing, both mutant beasts and humans alike. But they were in the minority. Compared to the greedy individuals who were focused on absorbing the colorful spiritual energy, the fleeing group was minuscule. Especially in the human cities, the colorful spiritual energy rising from the ground was relatively sparse and manageable for most humans. The advantage of this was that in a city with a population of hundreds of thousands, at most a few hundred to a few thousand individuals would not be able to withstand the colorful spiritual energy and would completely disappear from the world. However, the downside was that humans would evolve one step slower than most mutant beasts. And perhaps, this was the unseen sense of balance of the world. Everything came at a cost. Take the depths of mountains and forests for example. At this moment, mutant beasts were exploding into pieces one after another, driving countless other mutant beasts to fall into madness and despair. Their madness in the face of despair and their desire to survive drove them to rush toward areas with sparser colorful spiritual energy. 1 turned 100, 100 turned thousands, 1,000 turned 10,000. Soon, tens of thousands of mutant beasts that were unable to withstand the multicolored spiritual energy spontaneously formed hordes after hordes, rushing toward areas with thinner spiritual energy in waves. Spiritual energy was denser in areas closer to nature, and so did the colorful spiritual energy, which was denser in the heart of mountains and forests. On the other hand, areas with thin spiritual energy were mostly human cities. As a result, an unprecedented beast tide was approaching not just China but the entire human race. Boom, 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 stampedes of hordes of beasts along with flocks of birds were rushing toward human cities. Compared to the fragile bodies of humans, mutant beasts had relatively robust bodies, making it a bit easier for them to hold on. They were certainly better off than humans, who could not withstand the colorful spiritual energy and silently disintegrated. For beings with robust bodies like them, if they were unable to withstand the spiritual energy, their bodies would slowly start ballooning until they blew up into pieces. It could be said that, in contrast to the silent disintegration of some humans, the demise of mutant beasts was quite gory. As a result, thunderous explosions could occasionally be heard amidst the stampeding beasts as a dense, nauseating smell of blood permeated the air. This smell of blood also drove the rest of the mutant beasts even more berserk. Roar, roar, roar. Screech, screech, screech. Roars and screeches filled the air, nearly drowning out the continuous tremors coming from the ground. Feeling the distant tremors, Wuxia slowly triggered his perspective from the treetop. In moments, he caught sight of surging waves of beasts stampeding out of the depths of the mountains, advancing continuously toward the direction of the city. Wuxia even saw quite a few mutant beasts from misty mountains merging into these waves. Only, these tides of beasts deliberately stayed far away from misty mountains. Compared to the dense spiritual energy in the heart of mountains, the spiritual energy around misty mountains was even more concentrated. Especially the colorful spiritual energy in North Canyon, which had almost reached the level of liquefaction. For these low-level mutant beasts, such concentrated colorful spiritual energy was akin to deadly poison. How could they willingly approach it when they were doing everything in their power to run away? This is the true apocalypse for humans. While these mutant beasts are weak and only a few of them are high-level, how can the humans cope facing such a staggering number of them? Wuxia murmured to himself. Watching the bigger and even more terrifying beast tide than before, his eyes shimmered slightly. In terms of quality, the beast tide that had struck Misty Mountains earlier was much stronger. Over a dozen mutant beasts were transcendents. But in terms of scale, it could not compare to the current beast tide. In any world, the weak had always been the majority. Just a single colony of ants had hundreds of thousands of ants. Just from this, it was easy to imagine how many weak mutant beasts there were. After a while, his gaze shifted to a small town not far from Misty Mountains. If I remember correctly, that town seems to be called Linhai Town. What a pity. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 227, Dark Day. Night of Bloodshed. Wuxia stopped paying attention to it. Compared to human cities, Wuxia cared more about himself. Howl, he greedily absorbed the colorful energy which caused his spiritual energy to soar at a visible pace. Since the second wave of spiritual energy tide was an opportunity for humans and mutant beasts, how could it not be for him as well? Only while humans and mutant beasts were experiencing qualitative breakthroughs, he, as a Tier 3 transcendent, was accumulating quantitatively. Every bit of quantitative change made Wuxia's foundation stronger and more robust. It could be said that Wuxia's cultivation tonight was worth several months of effort for ordinary mutant beasts, or possibly even more. Furthermore, the speed at which Wuxia was absorbing spiritual energy was several times, if not tens of times, faster than the mutant beasts here. Among the mutant beasts at his level, he held a significant advantage in absorbing spiritual energy, primarily due to his natural affinity with spiritual energy because of him being a spirit tree. Moreover, Yu's tree body was incredibly massive now. When all his pores had opened, his speed of spiritual energy absorption was rather terrifying. At the thought of this, a smirk tugged the corner of Yu's lips before he put his entire focus on his body, eagerly absorbing the limitless colorful spiritual energy. Opportunities like this were rare and far between. Meanwhile, on the defensive walls of several cities. Defend the walls at all costs. Under the pitch-black night, military officers' shouts, resembling high-pitched horns, pierced the night sky. In moments, numerous machine guns extended from openings in the defensive walls, and on top of the walls, mortars were set up one after another. Immediately afterward, open fire! A thunderous roar shook the night sky. Whereupon, bang bang bang. Muzzle flashes illuminated the night sky while mortar shells whistled through the air. Boom boom boom. Accompanied by continuous gunshots and explosions, bullets and mortar shells rained down on the dark tide of mutant beasts. In mere moments, painful and miserable wails of countless mutant beasts filled the air, while the ground was painted completely red. Faced with the well-prepared China, the fearsome beast tide suffered heavy casualties during the first assault. However, so what? The beast tide stretched out like an endless sea, inexhaustible. Whereas fist-sized mutant insects and mutant birds had swarmed through the air as far as one could see. No. A pitiful cry rang out as a tiny mutant horny, having managed to evade numerous bullets and artillery rounds, mercilessly stabbed into the neck of a fully armed soldier with its venomous stinger. Clutching his neck, the soldier dropped his machine gun, his body convulsing uncontrollably. The next moment, buzz buzz. The buzzing intensified as the mutant wasp came right out from the other side of the neck, leaving a streak of red behind. And at that moment the sky grew dim. Screech. Amidst the endless, pitiful cries of mutant birds as they plummeted from the sky, more mutant birds managed to fly over the tall defensive walls and rushed into the city. Damn it! Clenching his fists, a military officer could not help but roar out in frustration at the sight of a significant portion of the city engulfed by mutant birds. At the end of the day, all their preparations had been in vain. In the face of this massive beast tide, their arrangements had turned out to be frail. We can't escape, we can't escape, we can only fight. With a furious shout, a young man from a university clenched his fist and struck at a nearby mutant sparrow coming at him. The next moment, a deafening boom resounded before blood splashed everywhere, much to the young man's surprise. Haha. The young man broke into a laugh before stating loudly with an excited look on his face, "Don't worry, they aren't strong at most, they're at intermediate level. We can easily handle them." Stating this, the young man turned around. Immediately afterward, he caught sight of familiar figures falling down one after another, much to his horror and dismay. No, no! Staring blankly at the scene, the young man was a bit dumbfounded. How is this possible? How is this possible? They are supposed to be mutant birds I can easily punch to death. How do they have much greater spiritual energy than my classmates? And right at that moment, screech, 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 sharp screeches pulled the young man out of his thoughts. When he turned around, he saw a huge flock of mutant birds attacking him. No! Before the young man could react, his entire body was submerged in the flock. The beast tide not only tests a person's combat ability but also their adaptability. And, as I mentioned before, don't get even a drop of blood falling on yourself, otherwise more mutant beasts will target you. A teacher instructed, sorrowfully and regretfully. Such scenes were common not only in this city but throughout the areas occupied by the humans. In order to survive, one needed not only strength but also remarkable combat ability and a keen mastery of the finer details. Otherwise all they could do was leave everything to fate. After all, in the entire beast tide, apart from those superhumans, even high-level warriors were unable to protect themselves. Of course, the possibility of superhumans being overwhelmed by the beast tide due to some carelessness on their part could not be ruled out either. In a real battlefield, no one could guarantee that no accidents would happen. On this dark and dreary night, with stars and moon hidden, countless mutant beasts stampede toward the cities, sweeping through the major cities of China. No, not only China, but it was happening throughout the world. It was worth mentioning that China had already erected tall defensive walls, which allowed them to ward off most of the beast tide's first wave of attacks. Only the mutant birds managed to fly over the walls and enter the cities. However, other nations were not as fortunate. In almost an instant, the immense beast tide flooded their cities, painting them red with blood, and filled them with wails of despair. In just half an hour, several cities had been razed to the ground, reduced into dead cities. Not every city had a population as large as those in China. In other countries, a population of tens of thousands was considered substantial. With such a smaller base, there was a lack of combatants they could deploy. Thus, when faced with the onslaught of the beast tide, they were unable to hold on. One could easily imagine the despairing scene. In other words, the fact that China was home to a quarter of the world's population ironically played in the favor of China on this disastrous day. The sheer number of people ensured an ample fighting force. Occasional appearances of prodigies also greatly compensated for the inadequacies of the military. This dark and dreary night was filled with blood and howls and growls of the beasts. This night would be forever etched in the annals of human history. Humans, the dominant species on this planet, was ultimately shaken by the rampage of other species. Until, a moment when a light as bright as sun lit up the dark sky. Countless powerful mutant beasts hidden in the depths could not help but have their pupils shrink at the sight of this. However, it was only able to shake, not overthrow. After all, the power of nuclear weapons was not to be taken lightly. At least, for the beast tide formed by these low-level beasts, it was a true force of destruction that could devastate mountains and shatter the earth. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 228, Nuclear Strike and Conspiracies. A massive mushroom cloud rose into the sky. It was as bright as the sun itself, and the intense heat wave that followed seemed capable of melting everything. In moments, a vast and powerful shock wave swept the city that had already been declared dead. There were no cries, no wails. There was nothing but an eerie silence. Nuclear weapons that had been playing a huge role in maintaining peace throughout the world had finally been unleashed tonight. In some secret location in America, a woman with blonde hair reported with a pale face, 80% of Sue's population has already been confirmed to have been wiped out by the mutant beasts. 80%? A sigh escaped the lips of an elderly man with white hair, a hint of helplessness on his. A city, even if it was small and remote, had vanished from America's territory just like this. Be that as it may, they had no choice. Through surveillance, they had already confirmed that the entire population of Sue, the tens of thousands of people, had been trampled by the beast tide. The images transmitted by their remote surveillance had shocked the entire America. The piercing roars of beasts, the blood-red ground. Severed limbs, mutilated corpses. There was no human alive, only a myriad of mutant beasts remained, feasting upon the corpses. It was intolerable, utterly intolerable. The pride of America could not be trampled upon by mutant beasts. In almost no time at all, the Congress of America had approved the request to launch nuclear weapons. At the same time, across the entire America, as many as dozens of nuclear warheads were launched, all targeting the dead cities near the heart of the forests. However, one had to admit this situation was quite ironic. Cosmopolitan cities of America and even China were either situated along the coast or surrounded by other cosmopolitan cities, and they faced the least impact from the beast tide. At most, they had to contend with the waves of mutant birds and the rat tides hidden deep within the cities. Compared to the overwhelming beast tide faced by those remote cities, the threats they faced were negligible. Yet, even so, according to the comprehensive data collected by America, the population of the entire America was expected to fall by over 40% after this beast tide. Such a terrifying and shocking number had shaken the whole of America. And also truly angered this dominant superpower. Launch, 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 shouting in a hoarse voice, the personnel responsible for firing the missiles repeatedly pressed the red button to launch with bloodshot eyes. Boom, 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 as the nuclear warheads fell, the night turned into day, lighting up the skies of America. One major city after another, where the population had not been invaded by the beast tide, saw people spontaneously pouring out onto the streets, gazing at the mushroom clouds rising in the distance, offering silent prayers. Meanwhile, in China, another dominant nation that was no less powerful than America, everyone was hesitating. Do we really have to launch nuclear weapons? In a rare moment when the highest authority asked everyone's opinion, the high-ranking individuals exchanged glances. Thanks to the tall defensive wall, China was spared from witnessing a dead city. Most of them were struggling to resist. While their forces were gradually dwindling due to continuous and extended battles, at least, a significant number of humans have survived. The nuclear warheads will target the center of the beast tides, outside the city walls. This will significantly alleviate the pressure on the major cities. After a brief discussion, the President of China decided to launch nuclear missiles. However, at this moment, as if remembering something important, the Deputy Director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau suddenly stood up and reported, "Sir, the data regarding the towering giant tree that appeared in Misty Mountains has now been analyzed. If the assessment is correct, its spiritual energy should be as high as 1,000,000, making it a truly terrifying entity of catastrophe class. Moreover, it has been hiding itself until the second round of spiritual energy tide began and only revealed itself then. It definitely harbors malicious intentions. What's more important is that 15 days ago, it was responsible for sniping our spiritual energy monitoring satellites." Listening to her reports one after another, the entire conference room fell into a heavy atmosphere. Spiritual energy as high as 1,000,000, catastrophe class, concealing itself. These words made everyone feel as if they were facing a terrifying existence lurking behind the shadow of China, watching and scheming. Taking a deep breath, the President of China, who had been preparing to leave, unexpectedly returned to his seat and leaned back in his chair. After a moment, as if having recalled something, the President of China suddenly asked, "General Li went missing in Misty Mountains, right?" "Yes," nodded the Deputy Director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau before adding, "Also, our Marines have also disappeared in Misty Mountains. And not that long ago, the superhumans who went to Misty Mountains have not returned." "That freaking tree monster!" An extremely old general with a withered face shouted thunderously as he turned livid. "This is more than just a tree monster. It has taken countless lives and is born with a thirst for blood. If this tree is not eliminated, our China will never have peace." "Really? Is it that serious?" A young man muttered, doubtful of the claim. "Umph." With a snort, the weathered old general retorted, "What do you even understand? Nowadays, most transcendent creatures possess intelligence. And the fact that this tree has been hiding and even destroyed our spiritual energy monitoring satellite from afar shows its malevolence and extreme prudence. Now it has revealed itself, probably feeling confident and unafraid of us." At this point, the old general looked at the President of China and suggested, "I think we should strike first and let it know the might of our China." "What do you mean?" questioned the President of China, narrowing his eyes. "While the beast tide is ravaging, we can launch multiple nuclear warheads directly to target this tree monster." When he stated the last part, the corners of his lips involuntarily rose into a cold smile. Although this tree monster may possess intelligence, it surely doesn't know the horror of nuclear weapons. More importantly, the real horror of nuclear weapons is the high temperature during the explosion, reaching even the surface temperature of the sun. Furthermore, its range is even broader than the explosion itself. Such terrifying heat should be able to annihilate this tree monster. After listening to the old general's suggestion, everyone exchanged glances. After a moment, a voice suddenly echoed in the conference room, "General Zhao, do you realize that if what you're saying is true, the nuclear warheads we would have to deploy may not be as simple as small-scale nuclear weapons, but rather large-scale or even super-large-scale nuclear weapons, which could even consume the cities around Misty Mountains?" "And what of it?" Waving his hand, General Zhao's expression turned slightly cold as he continued, "Compared to the pros, the rest is insignificant. You must understand what a catastrophe class means for China. Moreover, the beast tide is sweeping across the entire world tonight. If we launch nuclear weapons, we will have the full support of the people. But once tonight is over, if we attempt to launch a large-scale nuclear strike, the public skepticism alone would be enough to bury us with curses. Instead of dealing with that, it's better to act decisively and launch nuclear weapons to destroy this tree monster using tonight as cover. As for the cities nearby, most of its residents are already dead or injured, with fewer than tens of thousands remaining." At this point, General Zhao's expression became serious. Sighing, he stated, "I believe if they knew, they would also rest in peace, knowing that their sacrifices was not in vain." Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 229, Space Missile. In the dark and hazy sky, a colossal colorful vortex had blotted the sky. At this moment, Yuziu exhaled a long, deep breath. The next moment, a shout suddenly reverberated high in the sky. "Mist, arise." As the words fell, a thick fog began to rise from the ground, and even more fog emanated from Yuziu's crown. The fog acted like a barrier, obstructing the sight of humans. Although Wuxia was not afraid of humans currently, the feeling of being stripped naked and scrutinized by them was still uncomfortable. Now, his cultivating session was over, and it was time for the fog to rise. However, compared to before, the current fog was even more terrifying. It had blotted out the sky and hid the sun, turning that part of the area dim and hazy. It shrouded not just Misty Mountains but even the expanse of sky above Misty Mountains was shrouded in fog. Within this shroud of fog, there was only a towering willow tree swaying gently, flickering in intermittent and mysterious starlight. It's time to upgrade my abilities. With a faint smile, Wuxia finalized the next course of action. He did not have many abilities, but each and every one was important. On the surface, he had mastery of mist to conceal himself, but on the dark side, he possessed the hallucinogen ability, which can confuse the five senses. In terms of defense, he had the minor divine ability, the crystallization. In terms of offense, he had the branches and roots of his tree body, not to mention the most formidable attack, the flying willow leaf blade. In addition, there was the ability to make the ground surge, the river of earth. In this regard, one other ability could not be forgotten, which was the most promising ability that Wuxia had in his arsenal, the Wood Dragon. Wood Dragon was the foundation of Wuxia's abilities. With Wood Dragon he did not have to worry about having an unstable foundation every time he advanced. In fact, because of Wood Dragon, Wuxia had the confidence to turn the tables. Now which ability should I upgrade? After giving it some thought, Wuxia decided to prioritize upgrading his hallucinogen ability. His current hallucinogen ability was only at level 2. For Wuxia, hallucinogen had the potential to drastically affect the five senses of living beings and even manipulate their mind. Such a bizarre ability, when combined with the perpetual dense fog, would create even more realistic and terrifying mist beasts. Thinking of this, a sly grin appeared on Wuxia's face. System strengthened the level 2 ability, hallucinogen. As Wuxia spoke, a cold system prompt sounded in his ear. Ding, please confirm if you like to use 30,000 evolution points to upgrade the ability hallucinogen? Yes. Wuxia nodded his confirmation, not minding the expenditure. While 30,000 evolution points might seem like a lot, it was worth it to enhance an ability, especially under the current circumstances. The consumption of evolution points has always been worthwhile. The more he spent, the more terrifying the abilities he obtained. Meanwhile, in a mysterious location far away, accompanied by deafening sounds, several mountain peaks cracked apart, revealing very dark, metallic tubes. They were nuclear missile silos, the closest nuclear missile launch site to Misty Mountains, and also one of the largest nuclear missile launch sites. Target locked, please confirm if we should proceed with the launch. Affirmative. Followed by an affirmation in a cold voice, the nuclear missile silos trembled slightly. Immediately after. Boom, 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 several nuclear missiles slowly rose from the ground. Not only here, but nuclear missiles were also being launched all over China. However, compared to this launch site, most of the other launch sites carried tactical nuclear warheads that had a range of up to 10 to 20 kilometers at most. In contrast, this particular nuclear bomb launch site was equipped with strategic warheads. Their range was enough to swallow a radius of 100 kilometers, not to mention the continuous nuclear radiation, which was even more deadly. At this moment, while Wuxia was enhancing his abilities, a sense of danger suddenly gripped his heart. What is it? Slowly raising his gaze, Wuxia's eyes were drawn to a certain direction. After a moment, a deafening explosion, followed by a mushroom-shaped cloud rising in the horizon, entered his sight. So, China has finally used nuclear weapons? Wuxia muttered to himself, paying not much attention to it. In the current situation where beast tide was rampaging across the world, it was not surprising for China to launch nuclear missiles. As for the radiation left behind by nuclear weapons, it was not worth mentioning compared to the current dire situation. Smiling to himself, Wuxia was about to focus on his cultivation again, when suddenly, a sense of imminent danger surged through him. Wait a minute? Once again taken aback, Wuxia's gaze locked onto several missiles heading toward Misty Mountains. Yes, missiles. However, the crisis these missiles posed to Wuxia was enough to make his heart race. Missiles carrying nuclear warheads? Wuxia's eyes narrowed slightly as speculation already flashed in his mind. Are they targeting the beast tide near Linhai town? While doubt crept into his mind, Wuxia became a bit more vigilant. not because of anything else but because Linhai Town was too close to him. If it was indeed a nuclear strike, it could easily affect him. Thinking of this, the countless willow leaves on Yu Ziyu's body began to tremble. At the same time he issued an order, "All of you return deep underground immediately." Underground? The mutant beasts in North Canyon were taken aback, but obeyed the order without a moment of hesitation. They all followed the entrance to the underground and rushed toward the depths of the earth. Even Sarcosuchus, after pondering for a moment, glanced deeply at the mushroom-shaped cloud rising in the horizon before proactively heading toward the underground entrance. While he was quite strong, he vaguely had a sense of crisis, one that could prove to be fatal. At this moment, as Yu Ziyu observed further, his face grew colder, because he discovered a chilling fact. The trajectories of these missiles did not seem to be just targeting the beast tied outside Linhai Town as he thought. Interesting. He chuckled coldly as his face turned even more solemn. Did China target me because I stood out like a tall tree, or was it something else? With these thoughts in mind, four crystal-clear willow leaves on Yu Ziyu's body began to shimmer as terrifying spiritual energy began to gather around them continuously. After a moment, the four crystal-clear willow leaves, which were already radiating a sharp aura, began to slightly tremble. Go! With a low shout, the four willow leaves sliced through the night sky, heading straight for the incoming missiles. Not long after. Boom, 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 consecutive explosions reverberated through the sky as four mushroom-shaped clouds rose in the horizon. The terrifying shockwaves spread at a speed visible to the naked eyes. Even Yu Ziyu could feel the resulting turbulence. However, what surprised Yu Ziyu at this moment was that the sense of danger in his heart was not diminishing but intensifying. It's too late already. With a cold smile, countless command personnel stared fanatically at the screen, where a nuclear missile was descending toward Misty Mountains from outer space. Space missiles, long-range missiles which are launched into outer space. They can strike various parts of the world, utilizing the rotation of the planet, even across continents. Apart from ICMBs, it's one of the few missiles in China's arsenal capable of carrying strategic nuclear warheads. On the surface, the four tactical nuclear warheads are attracting the attention of the tree monster, while in secret, the space missile is approaching it from outer space. Even if the tree monster sensed it, it would be too late. Because now, even if the space missile is intercepted, it would still explode in high orbit. At that moment, the strategic nuclear warhead would show the world's countless mutant beasts what true terror is. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 230, Catastrophic Destruction and the Terrifying Retaliation. Boom. Accompanied by a terrifying explosion, the entire world fell silent. A mushroom-shaped cloud rose in the horizon, and brilliant flames dyed the sky red. Looking from afar, not to mention Misty Mountains, even the human city Linhai Town, which was about 20 kilometers away from Misty Mountains, was shrouded. Crack, 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 countless windows in Linhai Town shattered from the terrifying explosion. At the same time, the whole town started quaking uncontrollably, as if an earthquake of magnitude 10 had struck. Sounds of despair and screams had already filled the entire town. But before it could continue any longer, a visible shockwave of tremendous force came from the sky. Rumble, the tall defensive walls failed to withstand the terrifying shockwave even for a breath and collapsed, and so did the numerous tall buildings in the town. Looking from afar, Linhai Town, this remote little town, was completely razed to the ground by the aftermath. And this Linhai Town was just the corner of a circular crater that had appeared in the ground all of a sudden. In other words, centered around Misty Mountains, a circular crater that was akin to a scar on the continent gradually becoming visible. Great, that's great. Accompanied by peals of laughter, countless people in the operations command room jumped up in excitement. Many even raised their glasses in celebration. It was a successful detonation. The space missile carrying a strategic nuclear warhead detonated successfully in high orbit, raising the temperature comparable to the surface of the sun, enough to distort space itself. The terrifying shockwave swept through hundreds of kilometers, and the intense radiation from the explosion was capable of depriving life of everything in its range. It could be said that the terror of nuclear weapons was enough to make all transcendent creatures shudder in fear. In human knowledge, a life capable of resisting nuclear weapons did not exist. While Tier 3 transcendents were extremely formidable, their strength was accredited to the fact that those mutant birds and beasts were able to move at super high speeds. These transcendent creatures that were capable of high-speed movement could easily evade nuclear strikes and even attack major human cities. But unfortunately, a tree monster was nothing more than a living and breathing target. Just like now, in the face of a nuclear strike, it could not do anything, not even escape. Quick, quick, inform the president and the others that we've successfully eliminated the tree monster. In the midst of joyful shouting, the military personnel hurried to spread the news. However, just at this moment, a surprised voice suddenly rang out in the operations command room. Hold on. What's that? Someone asked in surprise, causing most people to freeze in their tracks. After a moment, following the gaze of the person who had spoken, countless people were astonished to find that on the screen, that was as bright as daylight, a faint shadow of a towering giant tree had inexplicably appeared. It was as clear as a crystal. Faintly, it was shimmering with the starlight of spiritual energy. Its countless branches were interwoven with each other, forming an impenetrable canopy that covered the entire misty mountains. Looking from a distance, it appeared as if a massive crystal bowl was placed on the earth. What's this? Everyone gulped in nervousness, staring at this scene in disbelief. That's a fake, right? Are you kidding me? How is that possible? It's an illusion, it must be an illusion. Exclamations of disbelief echoed as countless people could not believe their eyes. But right then, as if to mock their disbelief, the towering tree in the screen, which seemed to be made of crystal, slowly shed its crystalline form, revealing its original lush, green appearance. Its branches retracted continuously, revealing the landscape that had been concealed by the branches before. It remained just as before, lush and green, filled with tall, ancient trees. Thanks to the canopy of branches, misty mountains remained unharmed. More importantly, the towering tree on the screen appeared even more terrifying. Not to mention the tree itself, even misty mountains remained unaffected under its protection. It's over, it's over. Staring blankly, one of the military personnel turned pale. It's fine, it's fine. Patting his shoulder, another person continued to console him. Didn't it just withstand the nuclear strike once? It can withstand it once, it can withstand it twice, I don't believe it can withstand it 3 times or 4 times. But before he could finish speaking, a furious roar filled with raging fury resounded through the sky. Humans, are you seeking death? The thunderous roar came through the screen. Vaguely, everyone seemed to see a terrifying figure, furious beyond measure. Boom. Star. As his branches swayed, the winds howled with an echoing fury. Spiritual energy surged, causing the mist to gather. In an instant, the entire world trembled as if it was afraid of something. Right at that very moment, accompanied by a deafening roar, the earth shook violently. Subsequently, to the sheer amazement of innumerable operation personnel, the earth ruptured, mountains and rivers fractured. Boom, boom, boom. Fearsome tremors continued to ripple through the earth. It was an earthquake of at least a magnitude 10 or maybe even 12. No one knew for sure. But everyone knew that a seismic event affecting half of China had just occurred. Crack, crack, crack. With crisp, thunderous cracks, the earth fractured in city after city. In a few cities, even the tall, defensive walls they relied on collapsed. At a speed visible to the naked eye, cracks spread from one end of the earth to the other. An earthquake of biblical proportions. It was the most destructive earthquake in human history. At this moment, almost half of the continent felt the terrifying tremors. An earthquake was already devastating, there was no need to mention it. However, adding to the woes, tonight was also a dark day for humanity. Hordes of mutant beasts were attacking human cities. Having built high walls in advance, China had suffered relatively little damage. But now, due to this sudden earthquake, everything has changed. At this moment, the high walls of nearly half the cities had collapsed. Although not many had collapsed, the cracks had now become the ideal points for the hordes of mutant beasts to breach the cities. Roar, 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 roaring and growling, innumerable crazed mutant beasts swarmed inside the high walls. And at this moment, not to mention mounting any resistance, the continuous earthquakes had filled countless humans with fear. Buildings shook left and right, occasionally collapsing. As far as humans were concerned, the safest cities had become the most dangerous places when the earthquake struck. The upper echelons of China understood this. All of this happened because they had offended a terrifying entity. And this terrifying entity was retaliating against them in a way beyond their comprehension. Meanwhile, deep within the northern canyon. Yuziyu exhaled a long deep breath, a sense of fatigue washing over his entire being. The minor divine ability, crystallization, was indeed quite amazing. It had absorbed the impact of the nuclear explosion for him, even withstood the super high temperature which was comparable to the surface of the sun, resisting most of it. However, Yuziyu still felt the searing heat straight down to his very core. He felt as if his very heart was on fire. Nonetheless, it was not fatal. In terms of injuries, it could only be considered a minor one. Thanks to his innate talent of super regeneration, Yuziyu felt a trace of coolness flowing within his body. However, that was not the most important thing. What was important was that, in his recent fit of rage, he had mobilized his primary root, which had reached 10,000 meters deep within the earth. It had almost transformed into a wood dragon. As a result, an earthquake affecting nearly half the continent had been triggered. The Great Earthquake was one of Yuziyu's most fearsome techniques. Using the wood dragon as the source, it stirred the entire earth, thereby triggering a catastrophic earthquake. As for how catastrophic it was. As he raised his gaze slowly, Yuziyu saw numerous cracks extending toward the horizon. "This is just the beginning," declared Yuziyu, his voice hoarse and tinged with weariness, yet carrying an exceptionally icy tone. Evolution begins with a big tree. Chapter 231, Qing Heir's Choice. Breakthrough. Gazing deeply into the expanse that stretched in the direction of China, Yuziyu's true form gradually sank. At this moment he could feel a mysterious force affecting him. Nuclear weapons, beyond their scorching temperatures and devastating shockwaves, concealed another dread-inducing facet: nuclear radiation. This type of nuclear radiation was not a toxin but a formidable force that acted on a genetic level. Even someone as powerful as Yuziyu could sense that his body was subtly being affected by this radiation. Of course, it did not pose that big of a problem for him. He could easily resist it with his current physique. In fact, not just him, any transcendent creature could withstand nuclear radiation. However, it was just resistance, nothing more, nothing less. Raising his gaze and looking at the hazy green that now enveloped more than half of Misty Mountains, Yuziyu's expression turned slightly cold. Because this time, Misty Mountains had truly become a forbidden zone for humans due to the nuclear strike. At least, in the short term, even without Yuziyu's presence, humans would not dare set foot in this radiation zone. Moreover, if things went as expected, this radiation would also affect plants and soil, potentially altering the ecology of Misty Mountains. Of course, one thing was certain: the effects of radiation might not necessarily be detrimental. At least, it might be true in this era of transcendence, where everyone and everything was evolving. The presence of radiation would, to some extent, accelerate this evolution. However, whether the direction of evolution was good or bad, no one could say for sure. Just like now, within Yuziyu's line of sight, he beheld countless ancient trees with gnarled branches and menacing trunks extending toward the sky. Pitch-black trunks, sinister branches. A dim, eerie, and damp atmosphere. In just a moment, the entire Misty Mountains felt depressing. Right then, as if sensing something, Yuziyu's gaze suddenly shifted to the distance. Soon after, his gaze fell on a hill dozens of kilometers away, echoing with a series of cries of despair. On this hill, a pregnant mutant macaque suddenly started sweating profusely. After a while, a strange little monkey pushed its way out of her belly. Deformed, Yuziyu's eyes narrowed slightly, witnessing the infant monkey born with several pairs of ear-like appendages. This was the most frightening aspect of radiation. One might reach heaven in a single bound or plummet straight down to hell. No one knew in which direction it would push evolution. What a pity! A sigh escaped his lips. A root broke through the soil, heading toward the infant macaque. After a moment, he picked up the deformed macaque that had just been born and headed back to North Canyon. As for the mother macaque, she had already died the moment she gave birth. Yuziyu took pity on the macaque and brought the deformed macaque baby back to take care of it. Right at that very moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Yuziyu's ears: "Master." Qing Heir bit her thin lips tightly before transforming into a wisp of red smoke and rising from the ground. "Is there something you want to say?" At this moment, Yuziyu's mood was quite heavy. "For humans, we are ultimately aliens." Qing Heir heaved a sigh as the depths of her eyes flickered with a hint of coldness. "Indeed." Nodding, Yuziyu once again looked in the direction of the humans. "I actually didn't want to provoke humans. In fact, I just wanted to remain neutral and protect things, just a little area, that's it." But, before he could finish his words, a terrifying aura surged around Yuziyu. Howl, the fierce gales roared like mournful cries, as an overwhelming aura of death and hostility engulfed the world. Those who are different cannot be trusted. Qing Er tightened her fist and heaved a long deep breath. She took a step forward and asked, "Master, please allow me to return to China." Qing Er. Before Yu Ziyu could say anything, Qing Er spoke firmly again, "This time, regardless of who is behind the nuclear incident, I will personally bring them back." With that, Qing Er's face turned cold. She looked deeply in the direction of China and declared in a low yet resolute voice, "Not only that, Master, please believe me. As long as I exist, China, no, the entire human race will never have peace." It sounded like an oath and a promise. Qing Er's long hair fluttered as her icy cold spiritual energy that seemed to be capable of freezing anyone's heart surged from her. Even Yu Ziyu felt a tinge of bone-chilling coldness. This girl," he sighed, but Yu Ziyu did not stop her. He had lost all patience with humans. After all, they were ultimately enemies, so why would he show them mercy? The moment they launched the nuclear missiles, the war had already started. However, the current Yu Ziyu did not have the qualifications to start a war yet. Still, that did not mean he would not in the future. More importantly, war was only the crudest form of retaliation. As these thoughts swirled in his mind, Yu Ziyu's gaze shifted to a young girl not far away. He gave his permission with a nod, "Go ahead, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever humans had done to us, we shall repay them in kind." Hearing this, Qing Er's lips curled up slightly. "But of course." Saying this, she added in a mournful voice, "This time, if it weren't for Master's divine abilities, more than half of Misty Mountains would have been destroyed. With such deep hatred, how can we not seek revenge?" As she spoke, Qing Er suddenly shifted her gaze and looked towards the entrance of a cave not far away. After a moment, tap, 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 with heavy footsteps, a young girl with fiery long hair slowly emerged from the entrance. Ling Er, Qing Er's current physical form. Yet at this moment, two figures with remarkably similar appearances, one real and one ethereal, stared at each other from a distance. In their eyes, a mysterious radiance happened to be flickering. After a while, to Yu Ziyu's surprise, Qing Er and Ling Er both took steps forward, gradually approaching each other. 1 step. 2 steps. In no time, the distance between the two figures was less than a meter. Raising her arms slowly, Qing Er gently caressed Ling Er's face. "You and I were originally two similar flowers," softly murmuring, Qing Er took another step forward. In moments, her entire being turned from solid to ethereal and entered Ling Er's body. And right at that very moment, with a deafening sound, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly surged into the sky. 120,000. 150,000. 170,000. The increase in her spiritual energy brought such a terrifying pressure that even Ling Er's long hair was swept along, fluttering toward the sky as if a wind was blowing. At this moment, if you were to look into Ling Er's eyes, one would definitely see a reflection of a figure in red clothing with a face that was strikingly similar to Ling Er's. "You've broken through, huh?" Yu Ziyu murmured, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had not expected Qing Er to make a breakthrough. However, upon further thought, Yu Ziyu could understand it to some extent. Qing Er was already at the peak of Tier 1. And the body she was possessing, Ling Er, possessed formidable fire-attribute spiritual energy. Now, after the two merged, when the soul and physical body became one, her breakthrough was no longer surprising. However, in doing so, Qing Er might have had to sacrifice something. At this moment, as if sensing Yu Ziyu's thoughts, a light chuckle sounded in his ears. "Please rest assured, Master. Now that Ling Er and I have completely merged, the possibility of getting discovered by others is next to nothing. Also, I now have 2 lives. Even if Ling Er were to fall, I can be reborn again with the strand of my soul left behind with you." As she spoke, Ling Er cast a deep gaze in the direction of the human settlement. "Without enough strength, how can I dare to say that humans will never have peace?" Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 232, Mighty and Majestic. The great mist blanketing the sky. After having heard Ling Er, Yu Ziyu also set aside his worries. With such life-saving measures, it was no wonder Ling Er is so confident. Just then Ling Er's gaze suddenly turned toward a corner of North Canyon, where a mutant black eagle was huddled, trembling. It was a Tier 1 transcendent giant eagle, but now all it could do was shiver in fear. Evidently, the recent nuclear strike and Yu's furious outburst had taken a significant toll on it. "Come here," stated Ling Er, extending her hand. Whereupon, a tremendous suction force emanated from her palm. In moments, to Yu's astonishment, the several-meter-tall mutant black eagle flew over to Ling Er as if it were a toy. "Submit or get destroyed." A chilling voice rang in the mutant black eagle's ear as fire butterflies began to appear in the air, raising the temperature of the surrounding rapidly, especially when combined with the flames gradually emanating from Ling Er. They became even more powerful and terrifying. Without hesitation, the mutant black eagle, which had already harbored a submissive heart, decisively let out low screeches. Screech, screech, screech. Hearing these subdued cries, Ling Er gradually eased the pressure around her. If this mutant black eagle had not submitted, she would not have minded burning it to ashes. She did not have much time to spare. Then, as if she remembered something, Ling Er raised her head and respectfully requested, looking at Yu, "Master, may I ask a favor?" "What is it? Just tell me." Yu smiled, a little piqued by Ling Er's request. "I would like to borrow the vampire." "The vampire?" Mumbling, Yu's roots penetrated deep into the earth, reaching the ice cavern. The vampire was a member of China's Genomarines who possessed some peculiar abilities. Moreover, his blood had some unique properties that were beneficial to Yu, which was why he was still alive. However, the vampire was not doing so well right now. Boom, 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 with the shaking of the ground, a nearly frozen figure with platinum blonde hair broke through the soil and emerged before the two. What a pitiful sight. Pursing her lips, Ling Er waved her hand as a tower of flame engulfed the frozen figure. In moments, hugging his still trembling body, the vampire finally opened his eyes. However, before he could make out anything, a cold, commanding voice sounded in his ears. "Mental enslavement." As she spoke, Ling Er pressed her palm against the vampire's forehead. Immediately after, the vampire started convulsing and twitching as if he was having a seizure. "Wow." Yu's eyes narrowed slightly as a look of astonishment crossed his face. After a moment, he read the information before his eyes. Mental enslavement. By utilizing a terrifying psychic power, one can forcibly enslave the minds of others. This ability can enslave beings of lower rank, one level lower, and can enslave multiple individuals. However, enslaving many individuals poses a greater burden on its user, and there is a higher risk of backlash. This ability is truly formidable. Yu was full of praise. The next moment he saw the vampire slowly raising his body and standing behind Ling Er, just like a servant. "Master, do you still have a use for this guy?" Ling Er asked, looking at Yu's tree body. "No, I've almost completed what I needed from him," replied Yu, shifting his gaze on his status screen. The previously blurry ability had now become clearer. He could faintly see the word, blood. It appeared to be related to blood. With a smile, Yu raised his gaze. The next moment, the transcendent black eagle slowly unfurled its wings. "All right then," saying so, Ling Er curled her lips into a smile before continuing, "Master, I'll take the vampire back to humans to stir up trouble. With him around, it will be easier to explain things." "Okay." Yu nodded his acknowledgement, his eyes filled with anticipation. After a moment, he sprinkled a few drops of life essence and stated, "Take them, they might come in handy." "Thank you, Master." Accepting the life essence, Ling Er leaped onto the back of the transcendent black eagle with the vampire. "Then I'll be off, Master." As she bid her goodbye, the transcendent black eagle under Ling Er's feet flapped its wings. In moments, it soared into the air, kicking up a storm before disappearing into the clouds. "That girl?" Smiling, Yu watched Ling Er until she vanished on the horizon, his eyes flickering with eager anticipation. If things went as expected, Ling Er might bring me quite a big surprise. But before that, I can't afford to remain idle either. Yu shifted his gaze before the dense fog started swirling. The next moment, terrifying mist beast after mist beast stepped out of the fog. "Originally, I only planned to expand towards the deserts, the north and other places, but now you forced me to change my mind," Yu whispered with a hint of coldness in his voice. Simultaneously, the mist beast, as though comprehending Yu's intent, emitted profound and reverberating roars, reminiscent of ancient times, as they surged toward the direction of human cities alongside the mist. Before an army sets out, the supply lines must be established. Wuxia was enacting on the same principle. Wherever the dense fog spread, it would become his territory. Naturally, wherever the thick fog was present, his minions were hidden. At this moment, from a distance, the fog covering the entire misty mountain seemed like a wave surging toward the human cities. Simultaneously, the ground was also surging, transforming into a mighty river. River of Earth. By transforming the earth into a river, Wuxia uses it to propel himself forward. This was quite a formidable ability. Now, along the direction of the dense mist, Wuxia silently advanced toward the human cities. Linhai City was no longer there. This remote small town had been leveled by the nuclear strike. As such, Wuxia's current target was another city not far from Misty Mountains. Maple Leaf City. It was a medium-sized city of China, surrounded by towering walls. However, during the earthquake caused by Wuxia earlier, the city had suffered extensive damage. The tall walls had collapsed in several places, and the buildings appeared to be in quite a precarious state, shaking from time to time. This city was riddled with holes, and what was even more terrifying was that, through a corner of the collapsed walls, the beast tide was surging into the entire city like waves. Kill them. Slaughter the mutant beasts. Tonight, Maple Leaf City will bathe in blood. Roaring and shouting, countless humans brandishing guns and blades, charged toward the beast tide. This was a war between species, a true bloodbath. Blood would be spilled until one side was completely, no mercy shown or given. Furthermore, it was worth noting that this city had not received the support of tactical nuclear missiles because it was only about 100 to 200 kilometers away from Misty Mountains. So, to avoid alerting Wuxia, the High Command of China had abandoned this city. All this city could do was fight to the death. Fortunately, as a medium-sized city, its military strength did not disappoint the government of China. It managed to hold back the surging beast tide, turning the city, ravaged as it was, into a real battlefield. However, at this moment, this city remained unaware that in the distance, a thick mist had slowly blanketed the sky. Vaguely, one could see numerous gigantic figures seemingly formed from mist, running on the thick mist, approaching the mountains. Evolution begins with a big tree. Chapter 233. Arrival. Sea of trees. Attack. Roaring, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, wielding a large cleaver, charged toward the approaching beast tide. With a swift motion, he swung his cleaver, sending out a several-meter-long energy blade. The next moment, with a crisp squish sound, dozens of mutant beasts were cleaved in half, blood splattering through the air. Old Li, originally named Li Ming, was one of the few Tier 1 superhumans of Maple Leaf City, whose swordsmanship happened to be quite formidable. These freaking beasts may not be very powerful individually, but their number is really overwhelming. Spitting in disdain, Old Li surveyed the seemingly endless tide of beasts in the distance. He could not help but feel his scalp tingle. He had already killed hundreds of mutant beasts. Even his arm had started to feel numb, and his remaining spiritual energy was dwindling. Yet there was no end of the beast tide in sight. What was even more terrifying was that these mutant beasts had been driven mad by the scent of blood. Their eyes were bloodshot with even greater savagery. At a glance, one could see red blood vessels streaking in their crimson eyes, suppressing madness and cruelty. Just at that moment, on top of a tall building not far from Old Li. Fire. Keep firing. Accompanied by shouts, a team of artillerymen had finished loading the shells in the mortar and got ready to fire. Boom, boom, boom. Countless artillery shells exploded in the midst of the beast tide, wreaking a carnage of blood again and again. Artillery had always been one of the most powerful weapons in mankind's arsenal. In just one volley, hundreds of mutant beasts were killed. However, it should be noted that these mutant beasts were just low-level mutant beasts. As such, their bodies were not strong enough to resist the shells. Moreover, they had been driven mad by the smell of blood. Otherwise, human artillery might not have achieved such brilliant results. After all, truly powerful mutant beasts were far more terrifying than the threat posed by these cannons. After wiping the sweat from his forehead, the commander of this artillery team lit a cigarette and gazed down at Old Li not far away before shouting loudly, "Old Li, do you think we can hold them back this time? Do you even need to ask?" Old Li broke into a hearty laugh, and tightened his grip on the large cleaver in his hand. After a moment, his feet kicked the ground as he charged toward the beast tide once again. At this moment, having taken a puff of his cigarette and watching Old Li desperately fighting in the beast tide below, the artillery commander shouted, grinning, "Get ready to support Old Li." In unison, the artillerymen began loading shells once more. This was the best battle plan Maple Leaf City devised for dealing with the beast tide. Superhumans took the front, while artillery provided support from behind. With this combination, they managed to keep the countless creatures at bay. Just at this moment, as if sensing something, Old Lee's eyes suddenly narrowed. He raised his gaze, and much to his dismay, he beheld a colossal wave of mist advancing ominously from the north of Maple Leaf City. "What's that?" Old Lee heightened his guard, looking in that direction. However, just at that moment, roar, 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 menacing roars and howls that seemed to come from ancient times suddenly echoed from within the thick fog. Simultaneously, a terrifying sight unfolded before the eyes of countless people. They witnessed whirlpools carried by the advancing mist, and within these swirling vortexes, faint silhouettes of lifelike mutant beasts came into view. "Mist beasts?" A human exclaimed in disbelief as he witnessed the mist-formed mutant beasts devouring a large swathe of the beast tide. Crunch, crunch. Sounds of crunching echoed as entire sections of the beast tide disappeared into thin air, leaving only an even denser crimson hue lingering in the air. "This can't be real?" A look of pallor crossed Old Lee's face, who saw the mist beasts in action. He was naturally not unfamiliar to the mist beasts. After all, Maple Leaf City was not far from Misty Mountains. He knew a thing or two about the horrors these creatures could unleash. They were indestructible, massive, and could easily unleash storms from their mouths. They were creepy creatures that were scary as hell. But the mist beasts had never ventured beyond the Misty Mountain. So how had they arrived here? Suddenly, as if realizing something, Old Lee's pupils constricted. If I remember correctly, a nuclear strike had been launched in the northern region just moments ago. Could it be? Before Old Lee could finish his thought. "No, no, please no. Please, please, please leave me alone." Piercing screams echoed through the sky as the approaching mist devoured not only vast swaths of the beast tide but also countless humans. Upon closer inspection, one could even see mist beast after mist beasts opening their gaping maws. "These damn beasts!" A thunderous roar sounded like a clap of thunder. Seeing these man-eating mist beasts, Old Lee was consumed by rage and swung his blade hard horizontally. However, just at that moment, boom, boom, boom. Tremors continuously coursed through the ground. What was even more terrifying was that from the numerous ground fissures left by the previous earthquake, a hint of green emerged. Advent of the tree world, a murmur filled with a cold, killing intent, seemingly resonating within everyone's mind. In the very instant these words fell, the tremors intensified. Countless large trees emerged from the cracks. Branches intertwined with each other and vibrant green leaves sprouted. Yet the true horror lay elsewhere. What was truly horrifying was that these gigantic trees covered the entire city. In other words, the entire city had transformed into a vast forest. Branches entwined around skyscrapers and leaves sprouted from windows. The hustle and bustle of the urban landscape merged with the greenery of the forest, creating an eerie juxtaposition. However, within this eerie scene, the countless humans and even mutant beasts showed no reaction. They were already being hung high in the air, ensnared by branches, including the small team of artillerymen who had been conversing with Old Lee moments ago. 100,000. Or perhaps 200,000. Or even 500,000. No one knew the exact number. But at this moment, the entire city fell into a deathly silence. Even some of the mutant beasts that had not been ensnared by the branches cowered on the ground, trembling in fear, as if they had sensed something horrifying. All because, in the next moment at the center of the city, boom. With an even more terrifying tremor, a lush, towering entity ascended. And then it rose higher and higher, until it reached towering heights. At this moment, a towering giant tree truly came into view, capturing the gaze of countless onlookers. Its branches and leaves glistened like green jade, emitting a soft, gentle radiance. Moreover, there were branches resembling green ethereal chains, enveloped in a luminous veil. It was both divine and extraordinary. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 234, standing alone in the forest. A willow tree rose from the center of the city, its willows, which looked like divine chains of green luminance, covered over half of the city, obscuring the sky. It was truly divine. At least in this moment, the remaining humans lost their voices, their gazes filled with astonishment as they looked upon this scene. Furthermore, there was even an elderly man who fell to his knees with a thud, and cried out, "Oh, divine tree, I implore you, please save us. My grandson, he was only 8 years old, only 8, and he was devoured by those cursed mutant beasts." Silence, a deathly silence ensued. However, after a moment, a roar suddenly resounded through the skies. "Old man, that's a tree monster." Roaring, a superhuman brandished a machete in hand, chopping down countless mutant branches lunging at him. A tree monster? A bitter smile crossed the old man's face as if he had not heard. Even the humans hanging from the branches in the tree world above pretended they had not heard anything. "If it can avenge me, even if it's a tree monster, it's still a divine tree." With these words, the old man's head slammed his head on the ground hard, splattering the ground with blood. "Ha!" A sigh echoed through half the city. Beside the old man, a root broke through the ground, entwined around him and lifted him into the air. Divine or monster? It's just a matter of perspective. As he spoke, the entire city quivered slightly. Following that, an overwhelming number of branches swept through the entire city. Before long, in the entire city, there were only a dozen or so people left resisting. Upon closer inspection, each of them was extraordinary. One person wielded a large machete with a face full of stubble. Although he was middle-aged, his spiritual energy had reached 70,000 to 80,000. Another person was a young man in military uniform, his rugged face exuding a cold yet resolute demeanor. Apart from these, there was also a brown-haired youth, holding 2 exquisitely crafted pistols. What was surprising, however, was that the pistols did not fire bullets but rather something strange akin to spiritual energy. Combining spiritual energy with technology, huh? Watching the young man not far away running through the forest and even firing repeatedly at the towering buildings, Yuziyu's expression changed a little. After a moment, with a flicker of thought. Boom boom boom. Accompanied by continuous tremors, a root as thick as an arm tore through the ground, advancing toward the young man. Damn it. Seemingly aware of the incoming root, the young man's face turned drastically pale. However, in the face of the root extending from Yuziyu's main body, all his struggles were in vain. In just a moment, a pitiful cry rang out as the root pierced through his chest, and then lifted him into the sky. Yuziyu had gained another valuable catch. As for the pistol that shot spiritual energy rounds, it naturally fell into Yuziyu's possession. However, after taking a look at it, he was a bit disappointed. The combination of spiritual energy and technology was not very thorough, and it consumed quite a bit of spiritual energy. It was still far from using it on a large scale. Nevertheless, this also confirmed another one of Yuziyu's speculations. Humanity was a race brimming with creativity, and they had already begun seeking new ways of survival. The spiritual energy guns were their starting point. In the future, spirit energy cannons, spiritual energy missiles would be born. All these spiritual energy weapons that were beyond their current understanding were not impossible. Even the birth of spiritual energy technology was foreseeable. However, the main question was, would they manage to survive until then? As if thinking of something, a cold smile played at the corner of Yuziyu's mouth. Then he shifted his gaze toward the 10 or so superhumans who were still struggling. One had to admit that the second wave of spiritual energy tide was an amazing baptism. Just after rising, it had already given birth to so many superhumans. And this was just the first night. They had not had the time to stabilize and temper their foundations. Yuziyu could foresee more than a dozen or possibly hundreds of superhumans being born. Nonetheless, they were Tier 1 superhumans. No matter how many of them there were, they were still ants in his eyes. As these thoughts crossed his mind, the crown of Yuziyu's tree body shook lightly. The next moment, screech, 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 sharp, piercing screeches resounded through the sky as fist-sized birds, as black as ink and emanating extremely cold, menacing aura, slowly rose into the sky. They were none other than peregrine falcons, the mutant bird that had been following Yuziyu from the very beginning. Now they have also reached Tier 1. Their innate talent, bullet dive, was even more potent than before. Of course, in addition to their innate talent, they had awakened a new ability. Flash. Peregrine falcons can burst forth with such speed that they are imperceptible to the naked eyes, akin to teleportation. It was another terrifying ability. It also befitted the identity of aerial overlords, peregrine falcons. After all, they were the most adept at speed among predatory birds, so it was understandable that they had awakened such a fearsome ability. By now, the 8 slowly ascending peregrine falcons had already locked onto their targets with their eagle-like eyes, and their wings had started trembling. The next moment, swoosh, 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 sounds of something cutting through the air at high speed filled the air as the peregrine falcons disappeared from sight, leaving only a barely noticeable wisp. By the time superhumans among the humans finally reacted, they felt a pain in their chests before they fell to the ground one after another. At this moment, there was only one person left in the entire city, leaning on a large cleaver, clutching his chest and staring intently at Wuxia in the city. Tree monster, why re here? Oldly roared that sounded like a howl, his eyes turning red. In just a few breaths, one tree had almost destroyed the entire city. Moreover, not just the humans, even countless mutant beasts had been taken down in one fell swoop. Not to mention the others, its terrifying might had even frightened a veteran superhuman like him out of his wits. But so what? As he stared at this seemingly divine yet extremely vicious tree monster in the distance, Oldly could not help but shout in anger. He was unwilling, even more so, refused to accept it. However, surprisingly, in the instant he roared, "Why am I here?" A light chuckle echoed throughout the city, plunging the entire city into a deathly silence. The beasts no longer roared, the humans no longer screamed. The entire city fell into an eerie silence. Countless humans bound by the branches looked in Wuxia's direction in disbelief. But, paralyzed by the toxins secreted by the branches, they could not do anything except stare in horror. Now, the only one who could express this disbelief was Oldly in the distance, who stood alone in the forest. How is this possible? His pale lips quivered as Oldly stared at Wuxia's tree body, finding it quite hard to believe. The tree monster can speak, and so clearly at that? Dumbfounded, Oldly looked as if he had seen a ghost. However, at that moment, Wuxia's voice echoed in the city once again. "I was originally in Misty Mountains, and thanks to your nuclear strike, Misty Mountains are no longer safe for habitation. Therefore, I had no choice but to come here and seek a place to reside." Wuxia then sneered and continued, "However, you humans are truly ruthless. In order to eliminate me, you even destroyed Linhai Town and even discarded Maple Leaf City. What an amazing strategy, really amazing." His continuous praises were filled with extreme sarcasm, causing countless people to exchange glances, perplexed. After realization finally dawned upon them, they could not help but be in total disbelief. On another side, as if he had figured it out, Oldly gritted his teeth and stated, "So, it's just as I suspected." Oldly gave out a miserable laugh, feeling helpless. They had failed to destroy the tree, and in the end they had invited retaliation. Evolution begins with a big tree. Chapter 235, Plan. Divide and Conquer. Wuxia, slowly looking up at the sky, let out a deep breath. It had not been that difficult for him to suppress an entire city alone. In fact, this was the most terrifying aspect of a Tier 3 Transcendent. Of course, there might not be that many fearful Tier 3 Transcendents like Wuxia. After all, Wuxia's original form was that of a willow tree that was rooted in one place. He excelled at wide-range attacks and possessed techniques like the advent of the tree world, which made his destructive power far beyond imagination. Afterward, he shot a deep glance into the nearby forest, where a towering figure stood amidst the trees, but the next moment, Wuxia paid no attention to it. Instead, he shifted his gaze toward the dense fog. After a while, the earth shook, and a statue-like figure slowly rose from the ground. Qing Gang, an earth elemental life form, was one of the few trusted subordinates who had transformed into an anomaly in the form of a human. "Gather the necessary resources from the city and take them back." "Yes." Upon hearing Wuxia's command, Qing Gang's eyes revealed a hint of joy. It had been a long time since he returned to the human world. Today, his return brought him a sense of delight. Of course, this kind of joy paled in comparison to Wuxia's feat of suppressing an entire city with his own strength. As he slowly raised his head and looked at Wuxia not far away, Qing Gang's gaze could not help but flicker. Now that Lord Divine Tree could effortlessly suppress a city, it would not be difficult for me to rule over an area in the future. Thinking this, Qing Gang felt even more pleased. Even the way he summoned his men behind became even more skillful. Hurry, hurry! Opportunities to collect resources from the humans like this are rare. With that, a troop of gorilla-like creatures resembling small mountains excitedly pounded their chests and rushed out from the dense fog. At that very moment, a blood-red vine suddenly stretched out from the mist. Upon closer inspection, it became apparent that she was a blood-red maiden clad in leaves and adorned in vines, which added a seductive charm to her appearance. "Master, what are your plans now?" Her voice reached Yuziyu from afar even before she arrived. "Plans?" Yuziyu mused, a faint smile curling his lips. After a moment, he shot a deep glance at Thorns before asking with interest, "What would you do in my place?" "I would fight and then retreat. There's no need to resort to a head-on confrontation," replied Thorns. As she spoke, her slender finger pointed as a blood-red vine as thick as a thumb fell to the ground. Before long, a scene resembling a map unfolded on the ground. "We are currently located in the northwest of China. We're in a pretty good defensive position. China can only threaten us with strategic weapons such as nuclear warheads. However, you, Master, can withstand nuclear warheads, so China will not use them easily. In this case, all we need to do is occupy the Sichuan region, which will make China wary of taking any further actions." Saying so, she pursed her lips into a smile before continuing, "I believe after seeing you suppress Maple Leaf City, China won't want other cities to be invaded again." "No, they won't," Yuziyu affirmed with certainty, nodding his head. Although Yuziyu's current strength was formidable, if he pushed China too hard, he would not have a good time either. China was not a small country, and as one of the major superpowers on this planet, its strength was far beyond what ordinary people could fathom. Yuziyu was confident in himself, but he would not make the mistake of underestimating China. "That's great then." A smile bloomed on Thorn's lips upon hearing Yuziyu's confident tone. She then pointed to the top left corner of the map and continued her analysis. "Our Misty Mountains act as a natural barrier, separating China from the desert, the Northern Territory, and even parts of the Yangtze River basin. If you, Master, are willing to properly manage our rear, I believe it won't be long before you can dominate the Sichuan belt and establish your influence." Speaking of this, she emphasized, "And at this moment, with the thick fog rising and using the Maple Leaf City as the boundary, we have effectively divided 1/8 of China's territory. Such losses should be a painful blow to China, even if they are unwilling to admit it. However, until China is absolutely certain in its ability to confront you, they will not dare to act recklessly. As long as we maintain a certain degree of restraint, we should not push China to a corner." With each word she spoke, Thorn's smile grew brighter. Faintly, she felt like she held a winning hand. Smacking his lips, Yuziyu looked deeply at the blood-red girl not far away. He had not realized that Thorns had a talent for warfare. Although her analysis had many shortcomings, it had accurately identified the key points, aligning with some of Yuziyu's own thoughts. By launching the nuclear missile and nearly destroying Misty Mountains, China had forged a deep enmity, and it had to be repaid. However, how it should be done was something that needed careful consideration. He might have led his army to occupy Maple Leaf City, but his current strength was not enough to dominate the entire China. After all, just using the River of Earth to travel and then using the advent of the tree world had consumed a staggering 40% of Yuziyu's spiritual energy. If he attempted to do this a few more times, even with 1,000,000 spiritual energy, he would be totally drained. Not to mention, a large-scale invasion would undoubtedly lead to an all-out war with China. Yuziyu was not willing to bear the consequences of such actions, nor he could afford to, especially with the threat of nuclear warfare looming over his head. One nuclear missile he could handle. Even 10 nuclear missiles would fail to shake him. But what about 100 or 1,000? If he pushed China into a corner, it would not hesitate to rain down nuclear missiles on him. Thinking of this, Yuziyu let out a deep breath and calmly stated, "A single Maple Leaf City would be enough to restrain them. They would indeed not think of launching another attack, however." At this point, Yuziyu's tone turned colder. "However, if they want me dead, why would I let them off so easily?" With that, one of Yuziyu's branches swirled through the air. After a moment, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, who was standing alone in the center of the forest, was brought in front of Yuziyu. Staring deeply at this middle-aged man, Yuziyu could not help but fall into a moment of silence. Despite depleted spiritual energy and severe injuries, he stood his ground, refusing to fall. Such determination was indeed commendable. However, despite his heartfelt praises, Yuziyu could not neglect his own plans. With this in mind, Yuziyu decisively snapped one of his branches. Snap. Followed by a crisp and clear sound, the middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, Old Li, felt a cold and refreshing feeling coursing through his body. Although it brought an intense bout of excruciating pain, this refreshing surge helped heal some of his injuries, making him significantly more awake. After a moment, as he opened his eyes, he found himself beneath a towering tree. As he laid eyes on the countless branches, resembling a chain-green radiance, swaying gently along the wind, Old Li's eyes turned bloodshot as he cursed, "You freaking tree monster, you will be cut down by us humans sooner or later." "Cut down?" Yu chuckled coldly, showing no concern. Instead, he stated nonchalantly, "Go back and tell your government that it's best to hand over the person responsible for planning the launch of nuclear missiles on Misty Mountains. Otherwise, I will make the entire Maple Leaf City disappear from the face of this earth, and every single human along with it." Having finished speaking, Yu, without waiting for Old Li to respond, coiled his branch around the middle-aged man and forcefully flung him toward the outskirts of Maple Leaf City. Ashish. While Sichuan may be in west-central China, the area they are referring to here is to the north of Chengdu, approximately in the northwest region of China. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 236, the successive appearance of monsters. Watching the middle-aged man with stubble being thrown out of Maple Leaf City, Thorns appeared a bit puzzled. "Master?" Thorns inquired. With a smile, Yu did not directly respond. Instead, he shifted the conversation, asking, "Thorns, do you think the high-ranking officials of China will hand over the person responsible for planning the launch of nuclear missiles on Misty Mountains?" "Ah." Thorns was a bit taken aback by the sudden question, then became lost in thought. After pondering for a while, Thorns replied, "Even if they do, it will likely be just a minor figure." "That's enough." Yu smirked before explaining straightforwardly, "I'm not after the mastermind, I want a statement from China. If they hand over a minor character for the sake of Maple Leaf City, the entire high-ranking officials of China will become a laughing stock. Their decision to yield to a transcendent for the first since the beginning of the era of transcendence will severely damage their credibility. If they refuse to surrender the mastermind, they would be sacrificing thousands of lives for the sake of protecting a high-ranking official. Moreover, their past actions such as destroying Misty Mountains and causing harm to a city in an attempt to eliminate a tree monster, would subject Chinese officials to public criticism." The corners of Yu's lips rose into a grin as he continued, "Whether they choose to hand over someone or not, for me it's the same. But for Chinese officials, either decision would be no different than a choice between life or death. So, no matter what kind of choice they may make, it would push them down the cliff. That's a true checkmate." Thorns was slightly taken aback by Yu's revelation, her gaze toward Yu becoming more complex. For some reason she felt that the divine tree understood human nature better than she did. Indeed, if the general public were to learn about this, even just the rumors would be enough to put the high-ranking Chinese officials in a difficult position. But the question is, will the public really find out? Given the Chinese government's means. At this moment, as if sensing Thorn's thoughts, Yu smiled and added, "Rest assured, the Chinese government can't hide this." Speaking of this, Qing Er's image could not help but flash in Yu's minds. Given her intelligence, she would definitely know how to stir the pot. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Federal Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau. Even after the loss of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring satellites, as an organization responsible for monitoring the entire China, they still had some control over the Sichuan region. Just 10 minutes ago, they had received the shocking news. The thick fog from Misty Mountains is sweeping from north to south, and it has already engulfed one of our cities, Maple Leaf City. As of now, countless civilians' fates remain unknown. A heavy voice resonated in the conference room, causing the entire room to fall into a deathly silence. Until a long time later, a faint voice suddenly broke the silence. "Is it the tree monster's retaliation?" "Probably." Nodding her agreement, the deputy director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau also fell into silence. A city had fallen just like that. Clearly it was a big blow to them. However, who could have expected that a monster could withstand nuclear weapons? At this moment, not to mention them, even the high-ranking officials of China were unable to sit still. They were all like ants on a hot wok, continuously holding meetings. Taking a deep breath, the deputy director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau looked at everyone before speaking, suppressing the shock in her heart. "What should we tell the higher-ups?" "The truth, of course," an elderly man replied, heaving a helpless sigh. Ah. The deputy director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau froze for a moment, lost in thought. I guess we have no choice but to tell the truth. But would the higher-ups be able to withstand this blow? We've failed to destroy the tree monster and now we're facing its retaliation. If my guess is right, that massive earthquake was also caused by that tree monster. Thinking of this, the beautiful deputy director could not help but break out in a cold sweat. Others might not know, but how could she not? Just because of that massive earthquake that swept through half of China, the losses suffered by China tonight were on par with America. 8 cities had already been breached by mutant beasts. It could be said that all of this was due to that one tree monster. Without it, China's defenses would have held, and they would have lost 2 or 3 cities at most. The deputy director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau shook her head in a barely noticeable manner, knowing that half a year worth of China's planning and construction had gone down the drain. Even more importantly, China now had to face the omnipotent tree monster. Heaving a sigh, the deputy director of the Spiritual Energy Monitoring Bureau slowly got up and made her way to the highest office to report the current situation. Meanwhile, not far from Maple Leaf City, on a highway, a middle-aged man covered in dirt was running like a madman. His terrifying speed generated a gust of wind, but it also worsened old Lee's injuries. However, he could not stop. Absolutely not. The entire Maple Leaf City was depending on him. More importantly, he had to report the information about the tree monster to the government. Before that, he absolutely could not die. With this in mind, Old Lee clutched his chest and ran even faster. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had gone by. According to the old calendar, March 9th had been designated as the dark day for humanity. However, the true disaster had only just begun. Horrifying mutant beasts emerged one after another, each stronger than anyone could have imagined, wreaking havoc on the entire world. On the east coast of America, the enormous sea monster that had destroyed cities in the past had returned. More importantly, the sea monster started absorbing the nuclear radiation left behind by the nuclear strike, and surprisingly, its aura started increasing at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. On the dark day, the strongest mutant sea monster discovered by America since the beginning era of transcendence invaded once again, carrying an unquenchable rage. The Tier 3 Transcendent, the ruler of the seas with 1 million spiritual energy, created enormous tsunamis, sweeping through several cities. After 3 days and nights of fierce battles with the American army, it eventually disappeared into the deep sea, leaving several cities in ruins. In Japan, several terrifying Tier 2 mutant beasts emerged, almost pushing the entire country to the brink of destruction. Fortunately, these Tier 2 mutant beasts ran into each other and actually started fighting each other, setting off an unprecedented battle. As a result, Japan managed to survive with half of its territory. As for the other half, it had become a paradise for mutant beasts. On the other side, in China, the country with countless ancient legends, a formidable presence had emerged. However, compared to the powerful mutant beasts that most countries encountered, a colossal tree had emerged in China. It had single-handedly caused a massive earthquake that swept through half the continent. Its power was several times more terrifying than the strongest sea monster encountered by America. This terrifying tree monster left all of humanity in shock, and the horrors of that massive earthquake still haunt countless residents of China till this day. Of course, various other formidable mutant beasts had emerged in various parts of China apart from the tree monster. For example, a Tier 2 mutant rat king had emerged from the sewers of Shanghai, that led a tide of rats that swept through Shanghai. The prairies were ravaged by packs of wolves. Tens of thousands of wolves, led by several Tier 2 alpha wolves, were attacking the defensive walls of China. In addition, deep and resonant roars that sounded to be coming straight from the prehistoric era could be heard coming from the depths of one of the forbidden zones of China, the Tian Shan Mountains. Some people even saw the blurry figure of a 100-meter-tall, colossal white rhinoceros roaming in the depths of the Tian Shan Mountains. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 237, Mammoths of Ice Age. 1. 6 million evolution points. As Yu sorted through the gains of these past few days, a huge grin was hanging on his lips. In addition to the evolution points harvested from the Beast Tide in Misty Mountains, he had also harvested nearly 400,000 evolution points in Maple Leaf City. Just because he was alone, he had buried tens of thousands of mutant beasts and humans. Killing such a staggering number of creatures would naturally provide a substantial amount of evolution points. This didn't even take into account the mutant beasts and humans hanging high up at his canopy, which were far greater in number. Now Yuziyu was waiting. Patiently waiting. Waiting for what choice China would make. If they were willing to hand over the mastermind behind the scenes, there would be no harm in letting these humans go. Furthermore, it should be noted that the exhaustion of humans and mutant beasts was drastically reduced when they were bound by the branches and suspended high in the tree canopy. According to Yuziyu's estimate, they would remain alive for at least 10 to 15 days. In other words, Yuziyu could afford to wait. Of course, while waiting, Yuziyu would not remain idle. Maple Leaf City. Currently, a veil of dense mist had shrouded the city, and a vast forest had merged with the man-made structures of the city. At this moment, Yuziyu, rooted at the center of the city, sank his consciousness into his tree body and calmly checked the ability he had recently upgraded, the hallucinogen. No, it was no longer called hallucinogen but illusory world. Illusory world, level 3, you can create a world of illusion expending spiritual energy and make everything sink into it. This was another extremely terrifying ability. Or rather, every level 3 ability was exceptionally terrifying. Now Yuziyu's illusory world was the same. The more realistic he wove the illusory world, the deeper the enemy would sink into it. Furthermore, he could manipulate the enemy through this ability. What a weird yet terrifying ability. Yuziyu smiled, feeling satisfied with this upgraded ability. If I'm able to cast it on a large scale, I might be able to incorporate the entire Misty Mountains into the illusion. By then, it would be difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion, and that would certainly be very scary. However, this seemed to be a long-term process. If I'm right, I would have to put in a lot of time and effort to set it up. It would require a lot of time to weave and perfect it until the enemy would find it difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion. If I could really achieve that level, it wouldn't be difficult for me to manipulate my enemies through this ability. Right at this moment, boom, 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 accompanied with quakes, a figure appeared from the depths of the thick mist. Lord Divine Tree, I've brought them. Grinning, Bull Demon put down a section of tree roots. At the end of the tree roots, several figures bound by the roots could be seen. These were the prey that Yuziyu had captured during the beast tide in Misty Mountains. Most of these prey were transcendents. They were exceptionally powerful and possessed remarkable innate talents. Yuziyu had instructed Bull Demon to bring these transcendent creatures here. For now, he was rooted in Maple Leaf City and had no rush to return to Misty Mountains. Moreover, with so many humans here, even if China knew he was in Maple Leaf City, they would not dare to do anything rashly. Thinking of this, Yuziyu could not help but shake his head. To be honest, he really did not want to get into a war of schemes with China. Unfortunately, his strength was not enough to suppress China. For now, all he could do was maintain peace using mutual checks and balances. Mutual checks and balances would inevitably mean hidden undercurrents. Just like now, Yuziyu could keenly sense numerous unfamiliar presence in the vicinity of Maple Leaf City. In addition, there were a few idiots who had entered Misty Mountains as well. Regrettably, these idiots would not last more than 15 minutes before they would be buried under the claws of innumerable mutant beasts lurking in the depths of the mist. This time Yuziyu was not alone. Apart from Nine Tails and White Tiger, Sarcosuchus, and others who remained in Misty Mountains, all other mutant beasts have followed Yuziyu here. It could be said that the current Maple Leaf City was even more dangerous than Misty Mountains. At this moment, Yuziyu's gaze turned to the several prey Bull Demon had brought. An elephant. However, compared to ordinary elephants, it was evidently many times more menacing. It had a height of over 10 meters, which made it look like a tall building. Its body was covered in fine, long, golden, reddish-brown and grayish-brown color, making it look thick. Keeping everything aside, just looking at its long hair, Yuziyu could tell that this giant elephant had astonishing defensive capabilities. Furthermore, its as white as jade ivory tusks were exceptionally huge, giving the impression that they could tear the sky apart. Mammoth? Murmuring, Yuziyu became somewhat certain of the identity of this giant elephant. He was not unfamiliar with mammoths. They were colossal creatures from the Ice Age, some of the most formidable living beings in the world, and had long been extinct. However, now, a creature which stood at the top of the food chain and had long thought to be extinct, had appeared in front of Yuziyu like this. If I'm right, it should be atavism. With a grin, Yuziyu's eyes focused his gaze before a series of information entered his sight. Race, mutant mammoth. Rank, Tier 1. Innate talent, heaven-tearing tusks. They are its most terrifying weapon, which constantly grows along with the mammoth. No creature can withstand its tusks, even if there is, it is definitely not of the same tier. Unique abilities, immense strength, its terrifying body size brings unprecedented strength. Barbarous stamp, raising its hoof high, it stomps the ground with such force that the resulting impact can tear anything in its path. Barbarous charge, its charge is like a runaway train, even a small mountain can't withstand it. Thick fur, long and dense hair surges with terrifying spiritual energy, providing the mammoth with formidable defense that ordinary attacks can't break through. After taking a long deep look at the giant fearsome mammoth, Wuxia could not help but smile. This was simply an advanced version of armored wild boar. But compared to armored wild boar, the mammoth might be several times or even dozens of times more fearsome. Just the difference in their size already put them in a different league. Moreover, as an atavistic beast, the mammoth had a physical body that the current mutant beasts could not compare to. And this was the frightening aspect of atavism. As atavistic beasts, their bodies were far stronger and more robust than the current mutant beasts. Furthermore, in addition to inheriting formidable physique, these enormous beasts that seemed to come from the prehistoric era had also awakened astonishing innate talents. From the moment of their birth, they were destined to be the trendsetters of this era of transcendence. And now, such a colossal beast stood silently in the distance, gazing at Wuxia in a daze. After a long while, a long and hearty trumpet rang as the mammoth took a step forward. The next moment, a deafening bam rang as the earth shook, and the surrounding buildings shook a couple times. Clearly, the mammoth's hundreds of tons of weight had quite an impact on the earth. Divine, tree, a hoarse yet heavy voice tinged with a touch of awkwardness, clearly called out to Wuxia. Do you know me? A faint smile appeared on Wuxia's lips, piqued. Before coming, fourth brother Sarcosuchus had already put some work on them. Bull Demon, who had already laid down next to Wuxia, suddenly opened his eyes and explained. I see, murmured Wuxia, secretly praising Sarcosuchus. You are as reliable as always. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 238, Pteranodon, the Titan of the Cretaceous period. At this moment, a long and deafening trumpet reverberated across Maple Leaf City. In the distance, the gigantic elephant lowered its head. I am willing to follow you, divine tree. The voice, although hoarse like before, carried a sincere tone. Even when Wuxia heard it, the corners of his mouth could not help but curl up. Great, great. Heartily laughing, Wuxia extended his branches and took away the roots binding the mammoth. Just like that, he had subdued a potentially powerful mutant beast without having to use much persuasion. Wuxia was pleasantly surprised by this. More importantly, the mammoth's innate talent was strong enough for it to bear the title of the seventh great beast under his command. Thinking of this, Wuxia took the initiative to ask, Do you have a name? No, replying in a muffled voice, the mammoth shook its head slightly. In that case, I'll give you a name. After some consideration, Wuxia spoke again. You were originally a beast from the Ice Age, and now your species have returned in the era of transcendence. I bestow upon you the name, Tundra. Tundra, the mammoth murmured to himself, his eyes slightly flickering. He seemed to be pondering or perhaps contemplating. Right at that very moment, Wuxia's voice rang in his ears once again. In addition, I bestow upon you the title of Seventh Great Beast. The Seventh Great Beast? As if realizing something, a glint of joy passed through Mammoth Tundra's eyes. Among the mutant beasts of Misty Mountains, the 9 great beasts were recognized as the top force under the Divine Tree's command. Currently there were only 7 of them, but no one could undermine their status. Especially with the recent addition of the 9th great beast, the panda, the wine immortal named Brewmaster, it elevated the status of the 9 great beasts to the highest level. Now, when the title of this 7th great beast was bestowed upon him, he felt special. Before he could give any more thought, a branch lightly touched his body. The next moment, a crisp snapping sound rang before a drop of thick essence fell upon him. This is life essence, it can stabilize your foundation. As Wuxia was explaining, Tundra felt a refreshing sensation washing over his body. Immediately afterward, his entire body convulsed, and he experienced a warmth akin to being embraced by a mother. After he was finished with the mammoth, Wuxia's gaze shifted to another colossal beast brought by Bull Demon. It was huge. In a corner, a huge beast with short and thick forelimbs, which looked quite terrifying and horrendous, was standing quietly. It happened to be another atavistic mutant beast, a dinosaur. Moreover, it did not appear to be an ordinary dinosaur. Its frame was extremely tall and the tail thick and hideous. The tyrannous gleam surging deep within its eyes would cause any onlooker's pupils to contract. It looks a bit like the legendary tyrant titan, Pteranodon, Wuxia murmured to himself, his pupils narrowing slightly. He had some impression of Pteranodon. It was a formidable dinosaur, ranking among the top predators and second only to the most famous dinosaur, the Tyrannosaurus. If the Tyrannosaurus was the tyrant at the end of the Cretaceous period, then describing the Pteranodon as the tyrant from the early to mid-Cretaceous period would not be an exaggeration. Furthermore, Tyrannosaurus meant tyrant lizard, while Pteranodon meant tyrant titan. Just from this, one could easily imagine how closely related these two dinosaurs were. Not to mention the fact that their size, their ferocity was practically identical. Even now, the gaping maw of this suspected Pteranodon was wide open, and it happened to be dripping with red blood. Near its feet lay a lifeless carcass, a Tier 0 Level 6 brown bear. During the short time Wuxia and the mammoth tundra were conversing, the brown bear had become its meal. Crunch, crunch, the beast voraciously kept chewing. Suddenly, as if it had discovered something, it slowly raised its gaze and looked coldly at Wuxia. Silence, both of them. Everything seemed to have fallen into a deathly silence. However, in the midst of this deathly silence, countless pieces of information flashed in Wuxia's mind. Race, mutant lizard. Rank, Tier 0 Level 9. Innate talent, atavism, born as a lizard, and evolved into a fearsome species of the Cretaceous period. Whether it's physique or ferocity, both are far beyond the current norms. Unique abilities, dragon's roar. Its roar is like a dragon's roar, extremely oppressive. Weaker mutant beast would involuntarily shiver upon hearing it. Scale armor. Its entire body is covered in a layer of scales, which provides it a powerful defense. Sharp claws. Its menacing claws are extremely sharp and can tear through the defenses of most mutant beasts. Berserk. The sight of blood triggers a berserk state, multiplying its combat power. Iron tail. Its huge tail is as hard and strong as iron. Even a casual swing can shatter rocks. As he went through the status screen of this giant menacing beast, Wuxia could not help but be satisfied. Its innate talent is probably stronger than Sarcosuchus, murmured Wuxia. At this moment, when he looked at this behemoth, his eyes could not help but shine. It was not a casual remark, he genuinely felt how strong this behemoth was. Even more terrifying was the fact that it had just reached Tier 0 Level 9, and yet it possessed such fearsome strength. Had it not encountered Wuxia, the most fearsome tyrant king the entire continent had ever witnessed would have been born in the future. Of course, it was quite possible that another tyrant king might have also been born by now. Regardless, now all depended on this behemoth submitting to him. As these thoughts swirled in his mind, Wuxia looked at the giant beast and slowly asked, "Are you willing to follow me?" The giant beast did not reply, it just stared deeply at Wuxia's tree body. However, at this moment, if one looked into its eyes, they would undoubtedly notice that it was suppressing something. There was a hint of vigilance flickering in the depths of its eyes. Interesting. Wuxia smiled, having understood a little. It wanted to resist, but it recognized the gap in their strength and temporarily suppressed its impulses. Amazing, truly amazing. Praising in his heart, Wuxia calmly extended a branch. The next moment, under his smiling gaze, the menacing behemoth allowed Wuxia to touch its body. Its exterior surface was extremely rough, but beneath this rough hide, Wuxia could also discern the formidable resilience and toughness of this colossal creature's hide. According to Wuxia's speculation, this colossal creature was likely capable of fighting Tier 1 Transcendence at just Tier 0 Level 9, depending on just its terrifying physique. This was verified during the previous beast tide. It alone charged straight through Wuxia's tree world, showing destructive power no less than an ordinary Transcendent. With such formidable combat prowess, coupled with its berserk ability, which granted it increasing strength as the battle raged on, it was not difficult for it to take down foes of higher tier. However, as the tyrant of the Cretaceous period, if it could not take down foes of higher tiers, it would be unworthy of the title, tyrant. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 239, Surging Dark Currents in China's Plan. From today onwards, you're the 8th great beast under my command, Titan. A light shout resonated through the sky, causing even the Pteranodon to be momentarily taken aback. However, in a moment, Ruhar! A roar shook the sky as the massive beast extended its neck and roared, even pushing away the clouds in the sky. Meanwhile, Yuziyu, watching the Pteranodon roaring instead of refusing, slightly nodded. The fact that the Pteranodon did not respond to him did not offend him. The more ferocious a savage beast, the less skilled it was in verbal communication, but one could discern some things from its actions. Like now, the Pteranodon was roaring with its head raised at Yuziyu's side. It was as if announcing something resembling a guardian. This naturally left Yuziyu quite pleased. Titan and Sarcosuchus. These two top-tier atavistic mutant beasts were more than enough to serve as his protectors. As for the mammoth, Tundra, while he too was an atavistic mutant beast, he lacked the ferocity of Sarcosuchus and the brutality of Titan. In terms of combat power, he might be slightly inferior. Though this was not that hard to understand. Both Sarcosuchus and Titan were the dominant predators of their respective era, top-tier carnivores. While the mammoth was also a dominating beast, it belonged to the herbivore category. Carnivore and herbivore. Although there was only a one-word difference, there was a vast gap between them like a chasm. If nurtured well, a future tyrant ruler can be expected out of you. Smiling, Yuziyu dripped a drop of life essence on it without hesitation. His life essence was amazing, especially when it was used for the first time. It was even better than spirit elixirs. Of course, this was not the most important part. The most crucial thing was that mutant beasts bathed in life essence would be infused with his aura, and the more this aura infused into them, the stronger the connection with him would be. However, it was a subtle influence, one that Yuziyu did not mention, and most mutant beasts would not notice it. The few intelligent mutant beasts might have vaguely noticed it, but they were loyal to him, so there was no need to worry about it. Now that all the positions of 9 great beasts have been filled, it's time to take action. As this thought crossed his mind, Yuziyu started cooking up a plan. Meanwhile, in China's highest office. Have you still not reached a decision? A cold voice reverberated in the office, casting a heavy shadow over the room. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a finger knocking the desk filled the room as a stern and serious look blanketed the face of the person with the highest authority in China. Every heaved a long, helpless sigh, exchanging glances with each other. While no one had mentioned it, these high-ranking individuals knew that it was a big problem. Maple Leaf City, a medium-sized city, had been occupied by a terrifying tree monster, and this tree monster was now threatening the government of China with tens of thousands of citizens. This was not just a major event, it was a death sentence. Even these high-ranking figures could not help but feel their scalps tingle. Tens of thousands of citizens were nothing but just a number to some of them. But, from the series of actions taken by the tree monster, everyone could tell that the terrifying entity hidden in the fog possessed intelligence on par with humans. It must die. Suggesting in a resolute voice, another veteran whose status was no less than General Zhao's. He was Zhou Lao, the commander of Chinese Special Forces, and one of the top 10 authoritative figures in China. No, now there were only 9. The silver-haired middle-aged man, General Li's position was now vacant. Furthermore, in the absence of General Li, his various disciples have been vying for power, showing signs of internal struggle. However, considering that General Li had countless loyal subordinates, these 9 people were reluctant to get involved. Given the crisis at hand, any unnecessary conflicts with General Li's faction should be avoided if possible. Those were resilient men who had fought their way up. If anyone other than General Li's disciples meddled in their affairs, they would be inviting trouble. Yes, the tree monster must die. Nodding his consensus, General Zhao also stood up. Then he glanced at everyone, then added in a heavy voice, "But 10 of thousands of Maple Leaf City residents are in its hands, and their fate remains unknown." General Zhao sighed, appearing a bit helpless. Be that as it may, if one were to peer into the depths of his eyes at this moment, they would definitely notice a rare hint of gloom. By asking to hand over the mastermind behind the nuclear strike, it was tantamount to asking him to come forward. Humph! Coldly snorting in his heart, General Zhao also shot a deep glance at the figure sitting on the main seat. As one of the twin titans of China, he had always been a mysterious figure, even more so than General Li. In addition, his means were far more terrifying, and his terror far exceeded what anyone could imagine. In other words, the final decision still rested on him. Apparently, the man sitting in the main seat seemed to have noticed General Zhao's gaze. He slowly raised his head and gave General Zhao a reassuring look. Then he faintly smiled and gently voiced his opinion. The tree monster is indeed terrifying, and this time, it is directly targeting our weaknesses. Speaking up to this point, this middle-aged man's tone also became self-deprecating. Whether we cooperate or not, it's deadened for us. Moreover, I do not know if it's an illusion, but I feel that this tree monster is well versed in politics. Hearing his analysis, General Zhao also slightly furrowed his brow. Politics. Yes, politics. Nodding slightly, the man in the main seat stood up again and continued, "Be that as it may, we can't just abandon tens of thousands of people, or it will affect the public's morale, which is not good for us. So what do you suggest we should do?" With a slightly narrowed gaze, General Zhao's face darkened as a hint of anger flashed in his eyes. At the end of the day, he was a military man. He was not good at hiding his emotions. The man who was sitting in the head seat just smiled and did not mind it. Instead, he just clapped. Clap, clap. Followed by crisp claps, the office door suddenly opened before a very familiar figure walked in through the door. What's that? A body double? Looking at the figure, everyone could not help but exclaim. Because this person looked almost identical to General Zhao, except for a slightly stiff facial expression, there was no difference. I intend to send him to Misty Mountains. If that tree monster keeps its word, the status of General Zhao should be enough to exchange for tens of thousands of people. Speaking up to this point, the middle-aged man also shot General Zhao a deep glance. However, during this time I request that old Zhao stay hidden. I suspect that there are people connected to that tree monster within us. What? Tree monster's people? How is that possible? An exclamation escaped the lips of the people. Their faces could not help but change. It's just a suspicion. The middle-aged man sighed, appearing a bit helpless. However, as he thought about the recent undercurrents surging within China, he could not help but shake his head. Every single news related to Maple Leaf City was supposed to be top secret, but it had spread through half of China like wildfire. Information about the tree monster, despite being classified, had still leaked out, making countless citizens aware of its terror. None of these were good signs. Evolution begins with a big tree. Chapter 240, Ice Attribute and Lightning Attribute Spirit Stones. Meanwhile, at a mysterious location within the border of China, a figure in red was quietly standing under the moonlight. Her slender silhouette appeared fragile and desolate. "Miss Ling, we've spread the news throughout the streets as you've instructed. No one discovered you, did they?" With a touch of coldness, Ling Er shot a glance toward a nearby man standing upright like a pine tree in the darkness. Hidden Fangs, the best intelligence organization under the silver-haired middle-aged man generally. Now it obeyed Ling Er. All of this was due to Ling Er's incredibly terrifying strength and the diary she had found in the silver-haired middle-aged man's house not long ago. Within the diary were the details of the various factions under General Li, both overt and covert. Hidden Fangs was one of the covert forces hidden from the public eye and also one of the most mysterious ones. By chance, she found the secret code and happened to be one of General Li's direct disciples. With the Hidden Fangs being leaderless, Ling Er took control of the organization under the guise of avenging General Li. Moreover, it was worth mentioning that with a ruthless killer like Vampire by her side, it was not difficult for her to keep the organization in line. "Yes, we haven't been discovered." With a firmer tone, the man with the cold demeanor affirmed, "Miss Ling Er, please trust our abilities." "Okay." Ling Er nodded. She too had confidence in Hidden Fang's capabilities. For now, Hidden Fang's efficiency was indeed frightening. Right then, as if sensing something, Ling Er waved off, stating, "Withdraw for now. I'll contact you when I need you." Affirmative. Saying so, the figure blended into the night. Shortly after he left, a colony of bats silently descended into the courtyard, before converging into an eerie young man with platinum blonde hair. "Master, the Genimarine's base has been taken over by other military factions." "Is that so?" Responding in a low voice, Ling Er shot a deep glance at the vampire, Carrie, before asking with a smile, "Do you think we have a chance to retake the Genimarine's base?" "Well?" After a moment of hesitation, Carrie was lost in thought. After a short while, as if he had thought of something, he replied with some certainty, "If Master is willing to seize power, and as long as you have obtained 1/8 of the power of the General Li, I believe that it should be that difficult take control of a Gendarmerine's base. That's true. Ling Er nodded, her eyes could not help but flicker. I guess we need to plan this out carefully. Thinking this, she raised her finger. The next moment, screech, a loud and resonant cry resonated through the night sky. Tell Master that the government will be making a move soon. He should be cautious. As she ordered, a giant eagle with a wingspan of 7 to 8 meters disappeared into the darkness of the night sky. Of course, the giant transcendent eagle would not be openly flying straight to Misty Mountains. After circling a few times, it reached a very high altitude where it spotted the figure it was searching for. A peregrine falcon, no larger than an adult's fist, was hiding among the depths of the clouds, concealing its presence. After a moment, seemingly sensing the giant transcendent eagle's arrival, the peregrine falcon immediately flapped its wings and flew toward it. This was the way Ling Er and Yu Ziyu exchanged messages now. Humans had already lost control of the sky. As such, a peregrine falcon of such small size and an ability to conceal its presence would be extremely hard to detect by humans at high altitudes in the night. Meanwhile in Maple Leaf City, Yu Ziyu began a new round of exploration after subduing the mammoth tundra and the pteranodon titan. Boom, 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 his roots spread deep into the earth, seemingly searching and excavating something. Not long after, he seemed to have discovered something as a faint smile appeared on Yu Ziyu's lips. Found it! Shouting in a delighted voice, Yu Ziyu's perspective shifted to a certain root. The next moment, a dark and enclosed space entered his sight, filled with a pile of spirit stones. Not many, just a few tones. However, these spirit stones included not only fire attribute and earth attribute spirit stones but also some peculiar ones. Some of the stones occasionally sparked with arcs of electricity, and there were some covered in a layer of frost, radiating a chilling aura. Lightning attribute and ice attribute spirit stones. Mumbling softly, Yu Ziyu looked at the corner of the enclosed space where these spirit stones were piled, his eyes flickering with a hint of excitement. Spirit stones were one of the most important resources in this era of transcendence. Currently, he possessed mines of earth attribute and fire attribute spirit stones, but mines for other attributes were extremely scarce. The discovery of lightning attribute and ice attribute spirit stones came as a pleasant surprise to Yu Ziyu. It was a proof of the fact that China had mined many spirit stone mines. Different attributes of spirit stone mines held extraordinary significance for Yu Ziyu. His earth attribute spirit stone mine had already helped him develop his divine ability, crystallization. If he could obtain spirit stone mines of other attributes, Yu Ziyu was confident that he could develop divine ability of different attributes as well. A divine ability was a symbol of immense power and terror. It was no different than having a terrifying ability to overturn the entire battlefield. If possible, I can take a shot at China's spirit stone mine. Yu Ziyu's corners of lips curled up slightly into a playful smile. Searching for other spirit stone mines alone was akin to finding a needle in a haystack. However, if he could use China's resources, searching spirit stone mines would be much simpler. After all, China should have a vast network of forces across the continent, which would make the search for spirit stone mines relatively easy. However, as these thoughts swirled in his mind, Yu Ziyu also felt it necessary to visit Raya Mountains, where the panda brewmaster used to live. He could obtain the fire attribute spirit stone mine there. With a fire attribute spirit stone mine, his spiritual energy would rapidly rise. More importantly, he might be able to cultivate a formidable fire attribute divine ability. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 241, the arrival of Chinese official and the terrifying scene. Outside the fog-covered Maple Leaf City, a convoy was slowly approaching. Thud, thud, thus, with heavy stomps of boots, numerous fully armed soldiers disembarked from the vehicles. General Zhao. A solemn expression had blanketed all the soldiers' worry, tinged with a hint of concern. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Waving off, General Zhao gave a reassuring smile. Then he signaled to a soldier nearby. Yes, sir. With a loud shout, the soldier climbed onto a jeep and switched on the loudspeakers mounted on it. In a moment, a loud voice echoed through the sky. We, the government, have arrived. We hope that Your Excellency will clear the way for us to negotiate. We, the government, have arrived. We hope that Your Excellency will clear the way for us to negotiate. We, the government, have arrived. We hope that your excellency will clear the way for us to negotiate. Oh. A slight exclamation escaped Yu Ziyu's lips, who was rooted in the center of Maple Leaf City, slightly taken aback. After a moment, he looked toward the source and saw a platoon of fully armed soldiers outside Maple Leaf City, including an extremely old man with gray hair and a bit weathered face. They've arrived? Yu Ziyu smiled but did not give them an immediate reply. Instead, he watched them with curiosity. Meanwhile, seeing Maple Leaf City still shrouded in dense fog unchanged, General Zhao heaved a long, deep sigh before walking to the jeep, grabbing a microphone and speaking loudly. "Hello, I am General Zhao Yunyi of China. I was the one responsible for the nuclear strike earlier. I've come now and I hope you will spare the civilians of Maple Leaf City." "General?" Yu Ziyu murmured, a bit intrigued. Could it be that the Chinese government really sent this guy? A general should be the highest commanding figure in the army. If I'm right, this guy should be one of the 10 most powerful figures in China, as Qing'er had mentioned. Thinking of this, Yu Ziyu's lips curled up slightly. As for whether this person is the real General Zhao Yunyi, he did not care. He just needed a figurehead from the Chinese government. However, it's still necessary to confirm. Smiling, Yu Ziyu began manipulating the branches. Before long, one after another branch pierced through the thick mist, stretching into the sky. Hanging at the end of these branches were extremely weak-looking humans, their lips pale. "Is he General Zhao Yunyi of the Federation?" Like a nightmare, a voice echoed in their minds, causing all these hundreds of people to shiver. The next moment, as they looked at the weathered old man rubbing their eyes, who looked quite majestic from afar, a look of excitement appeared in their eyes. Some even shouted loudly, General Zhao, please save us. Please, General Zhao, my wife and children are still inside." Their cries were both desperate and filled with hope, causing many soldiers to tremble. As they looked up, they saw humans being brought out from the mist by the branches one after another. But looking at these humans with their emaciated figures and extremely pale faces, not to mention the soldiers, even General Zhao himself had his eyes turned bloodshot. "Your Excellency, isn't this a bit too harsh?" General Zhao's raised arm trembled in anger as he rebuffed with a touch of hostility. "If it weren't for me, do you think they would still be alive?" A mocking voice with a hint of ridicule echoed in the air. His voice was like thunder, causing everyone to shudder. They had long heard that the tree monster could speak, but hearing it by themselves still came as a shock. However, just at this moment, boom, the mist rolled backward, revealing a 3-meter-wide path extending from within the fog. Ah! General Zhao's pupils shrank slightly, looking at the path extending from within the thick fog, his eyes flickering. "Now that you're here, why not step inside?" A faint voice echoed, as calm as ever. However, after a moment, his tone changed, becoming extremely cold. "Or do you expect to leave here alive?" The sudden change in tone immediately made the soldiers raise their guns, their expressions changing drastically. For a moment, everything seemed to have come to a standstill. Unfortunately, guns posed no threat to Yu Ziyu. After a glance, Yu Ziyu lost interest in them and turned his attention to a group of soldiers, rather the weathered old man surrounded by the soldiers. After a moment, Yu Ziyu was not disappointed. He saw the elderly man wave off to the soldiers, stepping out of the center. Nonetheless, 5 soldiers still stuck behind him. "Retreat," Zhao Yunyi shouted, his face turning ice-cold. "We swore to never retreat." All 5 responded in unison as they stepped even closer to General Zhao Yunyi. With a sigh, General Zhao Yunyi felt helpless. At this point, he had no choice but to continue on walking toward the path that had emerged from the thick fog. Inside Maple Leaf City, it was another scene. Everything was lush and green here. Countless branches were entwining around high-rise buildings, and tall trees had sprouted from the ground, turning the city dark and moist. Raising their heads slowly, General Zhao Yunyi and the others even saw human figures entwined by the branches overhead, wrapped up like buns. "I have arrived, please release them, Your Excellency," General Zhao Yunyi shouted, but the response was a deadly silence. At this moment, as he turned back to look, the road they had taken earlier was once again filled with thick fog. Vaguely, General Zhao Yunyi and the others caught sight of pairs of gleaming sinister eyes within the fog, peering at them. It was terrifying and bone-chilling. Even soldiers who had a strong willpower felt a shiver run down their spines at this moment. Just the aura unconsciously emanating from the nearby beasts made their nerves taut. "General," a soldier called out in a nervous tone. I told you not to follow me. Sighing, General Zhao once again lifted his feet and continued on. Not long after. Continuing along the path that had emerged within the thick mist, they had successfully traversed a dense forest. At this moment, the dense mist gradually dispersed, revealing a spacious area before their eyes. There were no tall buildings, it was as if the land had been leveled. There were no trees, only countless massive black pythons like crisscrossing the raised ground. At a glance, these countless entangled roots wove a net-like network covering the earth. Not only did they look hideous, but they also sent shivers down one's spine. Only because standing on each of these entangled roots was a terrifying mutant beast. The weakest of them was at least a Tier 0 Level 9 mutant beast. And the powerful ones were transcendent creatures that countless humans were terrified of. Evolution begins with a big tree. Chapter 242, Negotiation, the first conversation. A fully armored wild boar, that resembled a small mountain, was perched on one side, its fierce eyes gleaming. On the other side, a honey badger with electric arcs crackling around it was pawing with its claws on the root. Crackle, crackle. As its claws brushed against the roots, a series of sparks flew around. At a glance, General Zhao Yunyi and his men saw even more mutant beasts, far more terrifying than the ones they had seen before, lurking. In the sky above, amidst the churning, the massive mist beasts lay quietly in ambush. Gulp, gulp, the fully armed soldiers gulped nervously as they turned pale in fright. In the center, Zhao Yunyi's eyes were also filled with shock. How is this possible? The mutant beasts have actually formed such a large pack? With a look of disbelief, Zhao Yunyi slowly raised his head. After a moment, what came into view was a towering giant tree, an incredibly terrifying giant tree. Its trunk was so big that one would require dozens of people to hug it, and it was so tall that its trunk had disappeared into the depths of the fog. Of course, what was most terrifying were the swaying, glowing branches that resembled chains of green luminescence. As for the spiritual energy at just a few hundred meters away, the almost liquefied spiritual energy made them feel suffocated. Your Excellency! Zhao Yunyi somehow suppressed the shock in his heart as his pupils shrank to the size of needle tips. Ha! The response he received was a playful laughter. However, after a moment, this laughter was replaced by a cold sneer. I don't care if you are really Zhao Yunyi or whether you are really the general. But remember this, if you dare to appear before the world and be discovered by me, you should then be prepared to face my full wrath. Rivers of blood will flow through the cities, countless lives will be lost, all because of you. And this is the price you'll have to pay for deceiving me. As he proclaimed, Yu Ziyu's gaze seemed to pierce through the hearts of the people. His gaze peered deep into Zhao Yunyi's eyes and vaguely seemed to see a group of people in the distance, whose faces had turned pale after hearing this proclamation. Meanwhile, in a mysterious place in China. With a loud bang, the entire office desk shattered into pieces. That bastard! An enraged voice thundered inside the room like a storm. The furious voice belonged to an old man who bore a strong resemblance to Zhao Yunyi. His anger was evident, with his ears practically fuming. He could not take it anymore. He really could not take it. A tree monster was actually threatening him, even the entire China. However, at this moment, this old man suddenly raised his head as if sensing something, and looked at his companions, who unlike him appeared quite calm. You guys. The old man's voice sounded uneasy, as if he had a bad premonition. Right then, the middle-aged man seated in the head seat heaved a helpless sigh before decreeing. General Zhao, you are temporarily grounded. Enjoy your retirement. What? Zhao Yunyi's face turned pale, looking at the man in the head seat. He found it hard to believe it. There's no choice, we can't ignore the threat of the tree monster right now. Saying this, the man in the head seat looked at a nearby screen. It was a video transmitted by the ultra-miniature camera installed deep in the clone's eyes. The video was showing everything the clone saw. At this moment, the gazes of many high-ranking individuals were focused on those terrifying mutant beasts. Setting aside the armored wild boar and the honey badger for the moment, what really caught their attention were two behemoths standing on either side of the giant tree. Their pupils could not help but shrink to the size of needle tips at the sight of them. One of them was the mammoth, a tyrant from the Ice Age. It had thick fur and ivory-like tusks. Its tusks, resembling a dancing dragon, were swaying left and right, stirring up the mist. The mutant mammoth that was straight out of the Ice Age was a formidable atavistic mutant beast. The other creature was not unfamiliar to everyone. It was a creature from the Cretaceous period. Even in its own era, it was known as invincible Pteranodon. Its ferocious eyes were filled with brutality. Its tail, resembling a steel whip, swayed lightly, creating a gust of wind. It was another atavistic mutant beast. These two atavistic mutant beasts stood guard on the left and right of the towering tree. Both of them were tens of meters tall. And apart from their enormous size, they were also radiating terrifying spiritual energy. It was impossible for one to not feel intimidated by such colossal beasts. Not to mention, these two behemoths were protecting the towering tree monster in the center. When they saw this scene, everyone fell into silence. They could not engage in a war with the tree monster, absolutely not. At least, not at this moment. If they fought, and even if they managed to eradicate the tree monster, they would have also suffered severe losses, to the point that they would lose their position as one of the superpowers. More importantly, they would lose the qualifications to compete in the new era. The Chinese government was unwilling and unable to bear such a price. In light of this, the high-ranking individuals had no choice but to agree to General Zhao's retirement. Even Zhou Lao, who had a close relationship with General Zhao, chose silence at this moment. The tree monster had already become angry. While it was certain that a battle would eventually take place, it was absolutely not the time for it now. Meanwhile, at the center of Maple Leaf City, Yu Ziyu gazed deeply at Zhao Yunyi before stating, "However, since you have shown sincerity, I will naturally keep my promise." The moment he mentioned this, his spiritual energy surged and countless branches, as if infused with life, rushed out of mist one after another, reaching toward the outskirts of Maple Leaf City. At the tips of these branches were humans, frail and emaciated and haggard. He was releasing them. He naturally had to. Otherwise, how could the people know that the Chinese government had bowed to the tree monster? Now, with 20,000 to 30,000 old, weak and emaciated citizens being released, the Chinese government could not possibly put a lid on it. No matter how they tried to conceal it, one fact was undeniable. China had lost, utterly and completely. In the pursuit of eradicating a single tree monster, they had resorted to a strategic nuclear missile. Yet in the end, Maple Leaf City fell, and its citizens were taken hostages. Furthermore, it cost them a Chinese general just to ensure their release. Thinking of this, a slight smile crept onto Yu Ziyu's lips. However, after a moment, as if he had remembered something, one of the branches suddenly shook. Swoosh, accompanied by the sound of something rapidly moving through the air, Zhao Yunyi suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. Lowering his head, he saw a finger-thick branch, expanding and contracting as if it was swallowing something. "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you, from now on, Maple Leaf City is my territory. Any humans who dare to set foot here do so at their own risk." A playful voice whispered in the ears of high-ranking figures of the Chinese government. But before they could respond, the holographic screen suddenly blacked out. "Does it know we were watching it?" One person narrowed their eyes slightly and expressed his doubt. It had most likely noticed from the very start. After all, transcendence like it possessed methods beyond our imagination. Saying this, the man in the head seat stood up and headed toward the door. He had many things to attend to. The tree monster was just of the many. Although it posed the greatest threat, at least it could be negotiated with. As if remembering something, the middle-aged man's expression turned cold. The Highland wolf tide, the invasion of sea monsters. These chilling phrases revealed the dire situation China was currently facing. Not to mention China, the entire humanity was surrounded by threats. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 243, Transcendent Monk Vultures. The entire Maple Leaf City was shrouded in thick mist. At this moment, after dealing with Zhao Yunyi, an idea struck Yu Ziyu. Boom, 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 accompanied by the trembling of the earth, waves of soil surged like the ocean, spreading toward the distance. Taking advantage of the cover provided by the dense fog, Yu Ziyu was silently making his way to Misty Mountains. Maple Leaf City was ultimately too close to humans. Misty Mountains was Yu Ziyu's true stronghold. Not to mention the underground city that was already taking shape, the rich lodes of spirit stones alone were enough to anchor him there. After half a day, Yu Ziyu had returned to his starting point in Misty Mountains' North Canyon. Gazing at the familiar scenery, Yu Ziyu could not help but feel sentimental. However, before he could relish this feeling, his attention was drawn to a figure. Boom! His gaze was drawn to a pair of flapping white wings, creating a formidable gust of wind, heralding the arrival of a massive white tiger descending from the sky. Divine Tree! With a delighted cry, old third white tiger spread open his front paws and pounced towards Yuziyu. Yuziyu's expression slightly stiffened as he instinctively whipped a branch, sending the white tiger with white wings on his back flying. A look of distraught appeared on his face. "I'm not playing, why do you whip me every time?" "Well, it has become a habit," Yuziyu responded with a chuckle as he looked at the white wings that had grown on White Tiger's back with keen interest. These wings resembled dragon wings, broad and powerful. Every time they flapped, they generated a howling gale, faintly carrying the momentum of wind and lightning. "White wings?" Yuziyu murmured as his eyes narrowed slightly. He was not surprised that White Tiger had grown wings. After all, there were legends that one of the four fiends, the Cheongchi, looked like a tiger and a bull. It had a pair of wings and quills like a hedgehog. Now, for White Tiger, apart from not possessing the Cheongchi's brutality and bloodthirsty nature nor its twisted worldview, he closely resembled it in appearance. Furthermore, there was the saying, "Wings on a tiger is like getting a divine blessing." As these thoughts swirled in his mind, Yuziyu no longer found White Tiger growing wings a strange thing. After all, it was the era of transcendence, anything was possible. Just as he was thinking this, Yuziyu's mind was flooded with a series of information. White wings, clouds follow the dragon and winds follow the tiger. White Tiger's wings not only greatly enhance his control over the wind, but it can also significantly boost his own speed. These white wings are pretty remarkable. Yuziyu was full of praises, a smile blooming on his lips. With White Tiger gaining wings, Yuziyu had definitely gained a formidable aerial force among other things. After all, White Tiger was already the king of the forest and now, with wings, he could potentially dominate the skies as well. And if he were to team up with... As if he was struck with an idea, Yuziyu's gaze shifted to the distant spirit pond. In the spirit pond, 7 monk vultures, surrounded by raging flames, were struggling desperately. Occasionally they would flap their wings attempting to take flight. However, before they could even take flight, with a thunderous boom, towering waves of flames descended from the sky, slamming the monk vultures back into the spirit pond before they could even react, splashing the water into the air. Right then, a satisfied burp echoed in the distance. Looking up, they were surprised to see a chubby panda donning a straw hat sitting cross-legged, patting his tummy. "How many times have I told you, don't make it hard for me, did I or did I not say it? But you guys just don't listen." Voicing his complaints, the panda took another sip from his jug, whereupon the disgruntled look on his face was replaced with a satisfaction. To the panda, spirit wine was not only delicious but also a means of increasing his strength. And for a panda, growing stronger with a belly full of delicious food was probably the most wonderful thing. At this moment, as if sensing something, he turned his gaze toward Yuziyu. "Divine Tree, you're back." With a cheeky grin, the panda, whose face was flushed red in intoxication, raised the wine jug in his hand, proposing, "Want a sip?" Just as he proposed this, he added with an embarrassed look on his face, "I'm sorry, I forgot that you can't drink." Yuziyu's face turned stiff. He was really holding himself back from strangling the panda. How could he say such a thing in front of my face? Helpless, Yuziyu also began to miss the taste of food a little. Shaking his head and dispelling the complex thoughts in his mind, Yuziyu took the initiative to ask, "So, what's up with these monk vultures?" "They're still the same, stubborn as ever." With a grin, the panda licked his lips and suggested, "I say, Divine Tree, how about roasting one of these monk vultures today? They must taste great." Yuziyu's expression froze, and before he could respond, a tiger's roar rang out in the distance. "Old Ninth, I want to eat too. You must roast one for me as well." Hiss, hiss. Seemingly understand White Tiger's intentions, the monk vultures started making shrill hisses and flapping their wings in fear, their eyes filled with terror. "These guys." A playful smile appeared on Yuziyu's lips. He could see through the act the two of them were putting on. But I had to admit that it was quite effective. At least, these transcendent monk vultures are clearly frightened. I guess it would not be long before they are tamed. Once these 7 transcendent monk vultures are tamed, then coupled with the 8 peregrine falcons, our aerial combat capabilities would increase exponentially. Moreover, transcendent monk vultures excel in wide-area flame attacks, while peregrine falcons are skilled in precision single-target strikes. When combined, they could create a formidable air force. Thinking of this, Yuziyu glanced at the pouncing white tiger. This guy could serve as the commander of the air force. With this in mind, Yuziyu spoke up, "White tiger, 3 days. I'll give you 3 more days to tame these transcendent monk vultures." Tame them, and in just 3 days? Perplexed, White Tiger almost fell from the sky. "Yes, 3 days. I have confidence in you. Don't let me down." "What happens if I do?" White Tiger weakly asked as the corner of his lips twitched. "Disappoint me?" "Well, I'm considering making some tiger bone soup to replenish Brewmaster's body," Yuziyu stated with a hint of playfulness. He did not let the White Tiger's frightened face change his mind. Instead, he transferred his attention, sinking his consciousness into his tree body. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 244, Sentient Flying Blade. Now that I have abundant evolution points, I can focus on upgrading my abilities. Saying this, Yuziyu's gaze focused on his level 2 ability, Flying Willow Leaf Blade. As his most terrifying skill, even at just level 2, it was enough to make people tremble in fear. Currently, Yuziyu was looking forward to what this ability would bring at level 3 in terms of power. With that in mind, Yuziyu took the initiative and stated, "System, I want to upgrade the Flying Willow Leaf Blade." The next moment, the cold and electronic artificial voice rang in Yuziyu's ears, followed by a prompt. "Ding, are you sure you want to spend 100,000 evolution points to upgrade the Flying Willow Leaf Blade?" "Yes," Yuziyu agreed without a moment of hesitation. At this point, evolution points were in abundance for him. Moreover, after having finished dealing with the matters of Misty Mountains, Yuziyu had plans to venture to the sea. And as he had already decided to make rivers of blood flow, evolution points would come pouring in. "But by doing this, I fear my path will be filled with corpses," Yuziyu murmured as a complex expression took over his face. The thorn of a king had always been a mountain of corpses, it had been throughout history. Yuziyu understood this point, but he also had his own considerations. Excessive killing would eventually incur the wrath of both heaven and humanity. To avoid being surrounded by one powerful foe after another and yet carry out the bloodshed was a real concern. In light of this, the best way to kill was undoubtedly at sea. After all, a time would come when the mutant sea monsters and terrestrial mutant beasts would clash with each other, whether for territorial reasons or resource reasons. At the end of the day, aquatic and territorial mutant creatures were fundamentally opposed. Currently, it was the humans resisting the invasion of sea monsters. However, when the humans would become weaker and unable to hold the line, powerful terrestrial mutant beasts would naturally emerge. At that time, if Yuziyu managed to suppress the sea monsters, he would rise to the pinnacle of prestige among these creatures. This way, I can harvest evolution points, establish a reputation among many mutant beasts, and also create my own faction. Yuziyu murmured to himself, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Of course, it was just his plan. The specific course of action would depend on future developments. As for now, getting myself stronger is of greatest importance. As he was thinking this, Yuziyu suddenly felt a sharp aura emanating from him. Rip sounds akin to fabric being torn filled the air as countless minute cracks appeared in the air, much to Yuziyu's astonishment. Upon closer look, Yuziyu found the fallen leaves in the vicinity cut into two, as if they had been sliced by a knife. Sharp aura, an absolutely sharp aura. This was the formidable aspect of the Flying Willow Leaf Blade. Just its aura alone was so sharp that fragile objects were unable to withstand it and were shredded into pieces. At this moment, Yuziyu also felt that the 2 willow leaves he had been nurturing inside his body had become increasingly radiant. Faintly, they seemed to be more bright and colorful, as if something was about to seep out of them. "I wonder how strong these leaves are now." With a flash of thought, Yuziyu's entire body fiercely jolted. Immediately after, all the mutant beasts began to cry out in alarm, as if they had sensed something. Even powerful transcendents like White Tiger and Brewmaster looked vigilantly in Yuziyu's direction. Moments later, a willow leaf rising from the body of the divine tree caught their eyes. They were crystal clear and had a faint halo swirling around them. However, the moment the willow leaf appeared, crack after crack appeared in the air out of nowhere. At a closer look, one would notice black spiders' web-like cracks appearing floating around this willow leaf. "Space fissures," exclaimed the panda, his eyes widening in disbelief. "And this divine tree is just too strong." A shiver ran down the panda's spine, perplexed. Space cracks were a sign of strength. The current him, even using all his strength, could barely tear apart a bit of space, just a bit. Whereas, the divine tree, just the appearance of willow leaf had already caused the space around it to crack. One could easily picture the power contained in this willow leaf. And right at that very moment, Wuxia issued a command. Go. As he shouted, Wuxia's gaze focused on the willow leaf. The next moment, with a swoosh, the willow leaf disappeared in the horizon, leaving a streak of green light. The next moment, much to the horror of countless mutant beasts, Raya Mountains, the towering mountain range separating Misty Mountains and the northern frontier, suddenly shook. Esker. A crisp sound akin to fabric being torn echoed, followed by a crack appearing in the middle, slowly getting bigger. Bit by bit. Little by little. Until, with a deafening cracking sound, the continuous mountain peaks were sliced flat by a single leaf. This is just too terrifying, exclaimed White Tiger, trembling in fear. Not far away, the mammoth and pteranodon, upon witnessing this scene, had the corners of their mouths twitch. It was not just them. Even the 7 transcendent monk vultures struggling in the spirit pond fell silent for a moment. A single leaf had sliced the mountain peaks flat in succession. Furthermore, it was no ordinary mountain range, but towering mountains that acted like a barrier separating Wuxia's Misty Mountains from the northern frontier. Yet now, the peaks of this mountain range had been sliced off. This was truly terrifying. At this moment, in the eyes of many beasts, a portion of the distant Raya Mountains gradually started tilting toward the north, revealing a smooth mirror-like surface. And right at that very moment, swoosh, another swooshing sound of something rapidly cutting through the air echoed through the forest. The beasts raised their heads and saw a dazzling green streak of light descending from the sky. As its speed slowed down, they realized that it was the crystal-clear willow leaf that the divine tree had just shot out. Only its halo was a bit dimmer than before, but otherwise, it remained unchanged. Pretty good, marveling softly, Wuxia gazed at the willow leaf hovering in the air not far away, his eyes filled with excitement. This was the level 3 flying willow leaf blade. It was just like the willow leaves he had carefully nurtured and tempered, he could control it at will. In other words, the willow leaves he had refined could be used continuously as long as they were not damaged. What did this mean? His willow leaves, like legendary flying swords, could not only kill enemies from 1,000 miles away but also return to him at his command. Thinking about this, Wuxia's heart was filled with excitement. Although each time he used them would consume most of the willow leaves' energy and he would have to nourish them once again, it was much better than having to temper and nurture entirely new willow leaves. It was worth mentioning that Wuxia had nurtured this one leaf for a full 40 days, and was very much reluctant to use it. Now, having been able to freely control these willow leaves, Wuxia could already picture the day when his flying willow leaf blade had reached its peak. 9 flying blades would be like his life treasures, hovering around him and kill anyone who blocked his path, be that maybe God or Buddha. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 245, The 3 Behemoths. In addition to being able to freely control the flying willow leaf blades, I can also nurture another flying willow leaf blade. Wuxia grinned, feeling satisfied. He could nurture another flying willow leaf blade with every advancement in its level. This was indeed a very good thing. And why not? After all, each flying willow leaf blade was unparalleled in sharpness, so having an additional one meant that Wuxia's lethality would double. And it was not just a simple 1+1. Now, with a flash of thought, another willow leaf emerged from deep within Wuxia's body. Afterward, the 2 willow leaves chased each other like a dragon and a phoenix, leaving radiant green trails around Wuxia. In addition, one could also see minute cracks in the air everywhere they passed by. Let's choose another good-looking willow leaf and nurture it. Softly murmuring, Wuxia had already started selecting the willow leaf on the branches. After a short while, after playing with the 2 refined willow leaves for a while, Wuxia had also selected another willow leaf. Then, with a flicker of thought, the 3 willow leaves sank into the depths of Wuxia's tree body, one after another. At this moment, if Wuxia paid attention to them, he would definitely see a sight that would leave him astonished. The 2 willow leaves he had cultivated for a long time were actually shuttling back and forth around the new willow leaf. Faintly, a tinge of crystal-like thing began to flow toward the new willow leaf. Obviously, nourishing another willow leaf was more than just an increase in quantity. Meanwhile, Yuziyu was no longer paying attention to the flying willow leaf blade, rather his gaze was already focused on the distant mountains tilting in the distance. Rumble, the deafening roars rang to no end, and the earth trembled as if another massive earthquake was taking place. While the peak of this large mountain continued to slide towards the north, the mist created by Yuziyu seemed to have found an opportunity and started flowing in the direction of the north bit by bit. Just at this moment, after a long and deep exhale, a deafening shout reverberated through North Canyon, "Speed up the speed of the mountain's descent. Then our territory will expand toward the north in the future." "Yes, divine tree." The mutant beasts responded one after another as their eyes glimmered with excitement. Mutant beasts, or rather, the mutant beasts that could become transcendents, were not stupid. When they witnessed Yuziyu leveling Raya Mountains, they already had their suspicions. Now, with Yuziyu's confirmation, they could not help but be excited. Mutant beasts, after all, lived through slaughter. The law of the jungle was the true rule. And now they were waiting for an entirely new, undeveloped territory. The northern region was a mysterious place. After all, its year-round frigid climate and no human presence was indeed an extremely harsh environment. Rumor had it that Russia, a large nation in the north, had continually been shrinking its territory due to the harsh conditions. Now the entire northern region could be described as a paradise for mutant beasts. And it, along with the Great Desert, Yangtze River and Tibetan Plateau, were collectively known as the four treacherous lands within China. The term treacherous did not just refer to the harsh environment but also the fact that in these areas, mutant beasts were at their most fearsome. One was their astonishing number and the other was their unparalleled ferocity. According to Nine Tails and Bull Demon, the law of the jungle was played out every day in the Great Desert. Every moment and every second, countless mutant beasts were engaged in battles, painting the sky with blood. In this way, one could naturally imagine the ferocity of the mutant beasts living on the edge of life and death. However, on second thought, it made sense. The vast desert was like a yellow sea, without even a bit of shade to take cover. So, how could there not be a constant fight for life and death? Not to mention the peculiar climate of the desert. Sandstorms could suddenly arise and at other times, it could be bitterly cold. Its harsh living conditions ensure the ferocity of the mutant beasts. In comparison, the mutant beasts of Misty Mountains were practically raised in ivory towers. As for the northern territories, no words were needed. With its perpetual winter, scarcity of food, and harsh conditions, the competition among the mutant beasts is likely even more terrifying than in the Great Desert. As for the Tibetan Plateau and the Yangtze River, not to mention the environment, the thousands of Tibetan wolves and the endless schools of mutant fish were enough to send chills down one's spine. Treacherous lands were treacherous lands not just in name. At this moment, the response to Yuziyu's previous command was the quaking of the earth. Apparently, the three atavistic mutant beasts under Yuziyu's command turned into streaks of light, rushing towards Raya Mountains. Atavistic beasts were the most terrifying in terms of their physique and the size that ordinary beasts could not even compare with. Old Fourth, Sarcosuchus, was 40 to 50 meters long. His body was wrapped in rock-hard, brownish-yellow scales. Just at a first glance, he looked like the most ferocious of behemoths. Old Seventh, the mammoth tundra. As it had just become a transcendent, the increment in its increased size still required some time. Be that as it may, looking at its jade-like tusks and its thick fur, it did not appear any less formidable than Sarcosuchus. Whereas Old Eighth Titan, despite still being in Tier 0 Level 9 as the tyrant of the early Cretaceous period, it was far more ferocious than Sarcosuchus. Thud, 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 every time its thick hind legs landed on the ground, it caused fearsome tremors, and every time its grim and hideous head swayed, it sent many tall trees falling. From time to time, it opened its gaping maws and bit the large trees into pieces. Watching this, the corners of Yuziyu's lips twitched slightly. For some reason he had a feeling that even if it encountered him, it would bite off his trunk. Some mutant beasts, when they became ferocious, did not even spare their own kinds. And now, the Pteranodon seemed to be showing such a tendency. At this moment, after running dozens of kilometers, shaking the mountains and forests, the three behemoths arrived at the base of Raya Mountains. No words, no eye contact. All there was. Grower, grower. Deep, deep. Rohar, rohar. Three resonant and ancient roars echoed through the forest. After a moment, before other mutant beasts could react, The three behemoths headed straight toward the incision on the Raya Mountains. A touch of brutality flashed in their eyes. Sarcosuchus and Titan raised their massive steel whips-like tails, whereas the mammoth Tundra raised its 10-meter-long trunk, not to be outdone. Boom, boom, boom. 3 consecutive loud and deafening crashes rang as the upper half of Raya Mountains suddenly accelerated, sliding toward the north. Just a few seconds later. Boom, boom, boom. Another 3 loud crashes rang as the upper half of Raya Mountains began to sink. The mountain range that stretched for dozens of kilometers also slid down completely. The next moment. Boom, boom, boom. Continuous tremors spread in all directions. Far in the distance, people in many cities thought that another massive earthquake was about to hit, which left them frightened and their faces pale. Ashish. Raya Mountains here are Himalaya Mountains. As I was confused which mountains it was, I did not specify it. While it might not actually be called the Himalaya Mountains that you know of, it could be considered a part of it. So, from the next chapter on, I will be using the Himalaya Mountains. Evolution begins with a big tree, Chapter 246, The Difference in Spirit Stone Mines. With these 3 pioneering the northern region, I can be relieved. Watching the spectacle caused by the Sarcosuchus and the other 2, a slight smile tugged at the corners of Wuxia's lips. I have to admit, atavistic mutant beast strength is indeed beyond the reach of ordinary mutant beasts. However, right at that very moment, a muttering suddenly rang in the air. If I were at the Tier 3, I should be able to lift this entire mountain with one hand. Although the voice was very soft, Wuxia still caught it. Silently looking at a far-off peak that had already disappeared, the corners of Wuxia's lips twitched slightly. A single mountain would at least weigh 10 million tons. Even just half a mountain would still weigh at least 5 million tons. And lifting it with one hand? Thinking of this scene, Wuxia's expression became somewhat peculiar. But a moment later he turned his gaze to a certain place, the source of the muttering. If it's that guy, he should be able to do it. After all, his innate talent of strength is not for nothing. When he was just in Tier 0, he already possessed incredible strength, enough for the transcendent Sarcosuchus to be wary of him. Unfortunately, while his strength is formidable, he is quite small in size. Even after becoming transcendent, he is still only about the size of a thumb. Fighting with such a small stature would put him at a disadvantage. What if he had become a transcendent? As if realizing something, Wuxia turned to the golden ant with an intrigued look in his eyes. Little one, have you also become a transcendent? With a stunned look on its face, the golden ant turned its head slowly, looking at Wuxia in a daze. The next moment, its gloomy and ghastly gaze made Wuxia's heart skip a beat. Haha. Have I been so busy lately that I haven't paid attention to you little ones? Saying so, Wuxia decisively changed the subject and stated, let's see how much you've changed after becoming a transcendent. As soon as he finished speaking, a series of information flowed into Wuxia's mind. Race, mutant golden ant. Rank, Tier 1. Innate talent, earth-shaking strength. The ant race's innate talent of strength has evolved again, possessing terrifying potential far surpassing ordinary innate talents. Its actual strength is 100 times that of an ordinary mutant ant's. It is a true talent of strength. Abilities, sharp scales, terrifying strength can only be carried by a powerful body. Its body is enveloped in a layer of golden scales resembling armor. 6 legs, its sharp and scythe-like legs, under the influence of its terrifying strength, can cut through anything. Strength absorption, a terrifying ability born from a deep understanding of strength. It can absorb 30% of its opponent's strength and convert it into its own power, exponentially increasing its strength. Compared to other mutant beasts, the golden ant did indeed not have many abilities. However, looking at the brand new ability, strength absorption, Wuxia's eyes narrowed slightly. This little one is really going further and further on the path of penultimate strength. Wuxia marveled, unable to hold himself from sighing. It was already an incredible strength-based beast, and now, it even possessed the unique ability to absorb this strength, which was not a simple addition as 1 plus 1. If things did not deviate from the normal course, no human or mutant beast would exist in the future who can compete with the golden ant in terms of strength. After all, this proud son of heaven was born with the penultimate strength, and had truly formidable innate talent for strength. In light of this, the golden ant's statement of lifting the mountain with one hand after reaching Tier 3 proved not to be an empty boast. But when he thought of it, a strange image emerged in Yuziyu's mind. A small, thumb-sized figure lifting a mountain with one hand and then smashing it at the enemy. No matter what, there's something wrong with this entire picture. Shaking his head and dispelling the strange thoughts from his mind, Yuziyu gently patted the golden ant and encouraged it, saying, "Keep up the good work. I look forward to the day when I see you lifting a mountain range with one hand." Speechless and stunned, the golden ant's face turned slightly stiff. "Divine tree, you heard it?" The golden ant, who had always been cold-hearted, was dumbstruck and appeared a bit distraught. Perhaps, in terms of humans, this is called losing face. At this moment, as if sensing something, Yuziyu suddenly looked toward the direction of the Himalaya mountains. Through the flattened mountains, white streams were flowing over. "The cold from the north has even started spreading here?" Muttering to himself, Yuziyu began channeling his spiritual energy. A moment later. Boom, 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 the ground trembled as massive undulations resembling ocean waves made of earth surged forth, propelling Yuziyu's towering tree form toward the majestic Himalayan mountains. The entrance to the north still required him to guard it. Moreover, deep beneath the Himalayan mountains buried fire tribute spirit stone mines. As far as he was concerned, it was a great opportunity for him. By absorbing these fire tribute spirit stones, coupled with a large amount of evolution points, Yuziyu was confident that he would be able to become an intermediate-level Tier 3 Transcendent in a short period, meaning that his spiritual energy would break through the 3 to 4 million mark. However, the specifics depended on the scale of this fire tribute spirit stone mine. According to Qing Gang, it was just a small-sized spirit stone mine. In that case, Yuziyu's cultivation speed would probably be several times slower. After all, there was not just a difference in scale between small-sized spirit stone mines and medium-sized spirit stone mines, and even large-sized spirit stone mines, but also a difference in the purity of spirit stones. It should be brought to notice that a small-sized spirit stone mine could be used by a small city for several years. A medium-sized spirit stone mine was enough for a small province to use for several years. And a large-sized spirit stone mine could be used by a small nation for several years. From this, one could glean the disparity between stone mines of small, medium, and large sizes. Of course, using small city to describe the grade of spirit stone mine was merely a subjective classification. In the end, only a minority of people could truly utilize spirit stones for their cultivation. Most people may not even know about spirit stone mines. More importantly, the stronger a person was, the greater was their demand for spirit stones. For someone like Yuziyu, his consumption of spirit stones alone could rival that of half a small city. And this was normal. The weaker ones could not break through the transcendent even with tens of thousands of spiritual energy. Yet, Yuziyu's daily consumption would result in the increment of his spiritual energy in the hundreds, and possibly even thousands. However, in contrast to Yuziyu's over 1 million spiritual energy, this rate of spiritual energy growth was still slow. His best choice would be to supplement his cultivation with spirit stone mines and evolution points in order to maintain a good cultivation speed. Nevertheless, this was not without benefits. At the very least, it would be incredibly difficult for other mutant beasts to catch up to Yuziyu. As long as Yuziyu's spirit stone mines and evolution points kept up, he would always be far ahead of other mutants. After all, as a plant, his roots are anchored in the earth for thousands of meters. Yuziyu's speed of absorbing spiritual energy was pretty terrifying. Except for the deep sea, Yuziyu did not believe that there was any mutant beast on the continent whose spiritual energy could match or surpass his. While it was possible for one to become a Tier 3 Transcendent and have 1 million spiritual energy with ample opportunities, trying to catch up to his current 2.5 million spiritual energy was nothing short of a pipe dream. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.